Hello guys, welcome to Pika Fiction. So in this video, we will see what if Ash became the king of Galar and had to marry Nessa, and Marnie to rule. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1, The weight of the wheel. The air in Sonia's laboratory, usually thick with the scent of old books and the faint, electric hum of her Rotom phone, was surprisingly clear. Sunlight, a rare and precious commodity in the Galar region, streamed through the large bay windows, illuminating dust motes dancing over stacks of leather-bound research tomes and high-tech analysis equipment. It was a peaceful afternoon, the kind that felt borrowed from a different, calmer world. Ash Ketchum, now a man of 22, leaned back in a worn armchair, a mug of tea warming his hands. The years had sharpened the boyish roundness from his face, leaving behind a stronger jaw and a quiet intensity in his brown eyes. He was leaner, taller, and the perpetual energy that had once buzzed around him like a swarm of beedrill had settled into a steady, confident presence. He wore simple jeans and a dark blue jacket over a gray shirt, his ever-present cap turned backwards on his head. Beside his chair, Pikachu snoozed, his tail twitching in time with some pleasant, electric dream. "It's not just the power spots, you know," Sonia said, pushing a strand of sunset-colored hair from her face as she peered at a complex graph on her monitor. "The entire region, it's like a massive battery. The Galar particles aren't just concentrated in the dens, they're everywhere. A low-level, ambient field. I've never seen anything like it in Kanto, Johto, or any of your other stomping grounds." Across the room, Leon, the undefeated champion of Galar, let out a booming laugh. He was sprawled on a couch far too small for his frame, his signature cape draped over the back. "That's because Galar's got a champion-level energy field. Everything here is bigger, stronger, more exciting." Ash smiled, a genuine, easy expression that reached his eyes. "It's different, that's for sure. You can feel it in the Pokémon. They're spirited." "Spirited is one word for it," Sonia chuckled, swiveling in her chair. "Prone to giant, city-destroying temper tantrums is another." She looked at Ash, her expression turning more serious. "Honestly, Ash, it's good to have you here. It's been too long. After everything with Rose and Eternatus, having someone with your kind of experience around is a relief." It was an unspoken truth. Since Ash's last visit years ago, he hadn't stopped moving. He had conquered leagues, challenged champions, and faced down threats that made the darkest day look like a passing storm cloud. He rarely spoke of it, but the quiet authority he carried was earned. He was no longer just Leon's rival, he was his peer, in some ways his senior in the strange, unwritten fraternity of those who had saved the world. "I was just passing through on my way to the Crown Tundra," Ash said. "Wanted to see some old friends. Besides," he added, glancing at Leon, "I heard someone was still holding on to a title I might be interested in." Leon's grin widened. "Anytime, Ash. You know my door is always open for a champion-time battle." A sudden, low hum vibrated through the floorboards, rattling the teacups on the table. It wasn't an earthquake, it was a pure, resonant tone, like a giant tuning fork had been struck miles away. Pikachu's eyes snapped open, his ears perked and twitching. The fur on his back bristled. Ash sat bolt upright, his relaxed posture gone. His gaze shifted to the window, towards the distant, hazy line of the slumbering Weald. He felt it not just in his ears, but in his bones, a thrum of wrongness that coiled in his gut. It was a sensation he had come to know all too well, the dissonant chord that preceded chaos. "Pikachu?" he asked, his voice low. Pika, the little mouse Pokémon's cheeks sparked with agitated electricity. Sonia was already at her main console, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "Whoa! Massive energy spike. Unprecedented levels. It's not a Dynamax reading, it's something else. It's raw, unstable. The epicenter is, oh no. The Weald, Ash finished, already on his feet. The distant hum was rising in pitch, a keening whine that scraped at the edge of hearing. Leon shot up from the couch, his entire demeanor changing from relaxed friend to formidable champion. Sonia, get me the League authorities. Pinpoint the nearest town. I'm going. Wheelstone, Sonia answered, her voice tight with worry. It's a small settlement right on the edge of the forest. The energy readings are tearing right through it. As Leon grabbed his cape, his Rotom phone already buzzing at his ear as he barked orders, Ash was already moving towards the door. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't wait for a plan. He saw a problem, and his entire being was hardwired to move toward it. Leon looked over, seeing the set of Ash's jaw, the cold fire in his eyes. He'd seen that look before, on broadcasts from the summit of Mount Coronet and in the heart of the Lumiose crisis. He gave a sharp nod, a gesture of absolute trust. Go, Ash. Do what you do best. Ash didn't need to be told twice. With a final, determined glance back, he was out the door, a flash of blue and gray against the afternoon sun. Pikachu was a yellow blur as he scrambled onto his familiar perch on Ash's shoulder, his small body tense and ready for a fight. They ran, their feet pounding a steady rhythm on the path leading away from Wedgehurst, towards the growing shadow on the horizon. The idyllic countryside dissolved into chaos long before they reached Wheelstone. The very air felt frayed, charged with a panicked energy that made Ash's teeth ache. Flocks of Rookity and Corvisquire swirled in the sky with no direction, crying out in distress as they collided with one another. A herd of Wooloo, their wool matted with mud and burrs, stampeded across a field, their gentle eyes wide with terror. They weren't angry, they were terrified, fleeing a threat they couldn't see. When they crested the final hill overlooking the town, the scene was worse than he had imagined. Wheelstone was a quaint collection of stone cottages with thatched roofs, a picture of rustic peace. Now, that peace was shattered. A shimmering, violet tear in the fabric of reality pulsed in the sky directly above the slumbering Weald, casting a sickly light over everything. It looked like a wound in the world, and from it bled a palpable aura of fear and confusion. The wild Pokémon of the Weald had been driven out and into the town. A massive, enraged Centiskorch was slithering through the main square, breathing jets of flame that set a market stall ablaze. A pack of Thievul, usually cunning and sly, were now just feral, snapping at a group of terrified townsfolk huddled behind an overturned cart. The town's few trainers were trying to fight back, but it was a losing battle. They were outnumbered and outmatched, their own Pokémon hesitant to attack the frenzied invaders. Ash didn't pause to take it all in. He processed the scene in a fraction of a second, his mind a whirlwind of tactical assessment. This wasn't a battle to be won, it was a crisis to be managed. Pikachu, use Electroweb on the ground in front of that herd of Boltund, he commanded, pointing to a street where the electric dogs were about to trample a small clinic. Don't hit them. Guide them away from the building. Pikachu leaped from his shoulder, a bolt of yellow lightning. A crackling net of electricity spread across the cobblestones, not as an attack, but as a barrier. The lead Boltund shied away from the unfamiliar energy, yelping and turning the panicked herd down a side street, away from the populated areas. Step 1, Crowd Control. Ash's eyes scanned the chaos. He saw a young trainer, no older than 15, his face pale with fear as his Raboot was backed into a corner by a snarling berserker. Hey! Ash's voice cut through the noise, sharp and clear with authority. Keep its attention. Don't let it focus on anything else. He didn't wait for a reply. He was already pulling a pokeball from his belt. Gengar, I need you. The shadow Pokémon materialized with a wicked grin, which faded as it took in the scene. It looked to Ash, awaiting his command. Gengar, use Will-O-Wisp on the Centiskorch to draw its fire, then Shadow Ball to break up that Thievul pack. Don't knock them out, just disorient them. Gengar cackled and shot off. Eerie blue flames erupted around the giant centipede, causing it to roar and turn its fiery attention away from the town's main well. A moment later, a globe of dark energy exploded harmlessly amidst the thievel, sending the startled Pokémon scattering in confusion. Step 2. Disrupt the primary threats. He saw a handful of Galar Rangers trying to form a line near the entrance to the Weald, their Pokémon looking overwhelmed. Ash ran towards them, sliding to a stop in the mud. "What's the plan?" a haggard-looking ranger shouted at him over the din. "Containment, not combat." Ash's voice was calm but carried an undeniable weight of command. "They're scared, not malicious. We need to form a perimeter, guide them out of the town, and keep them from doubling back. Do you have any Pokémon that can create walls or barriers?" "Sandaconda? Gigalith?" The rangers stared at him for a beat, taken aback by this stranger who spoke with the clarity of a seasoned general. Then, one of them nodded and barked orders to his squad. They moved with renewed purpose, their strategy shifting from a desperate defense to an organized containment. Just then, Sonia's car skidded to a halt on the road behind them. She jumped out, her face a mask of horror at the destruction. She saw the burning stall, the panicked civilians, but then she saw Ash. He was a whirlwind of motion and command, a fixed point in the center of the storm. He was directing trainers, calming Pokémon, and coordinating efforts with an instinctual grace that was breathtaking to behold. This wasn't the enthusiastic battler she knew, this was a leader. A loud, piercing shriek drew Ash's attention skyward. A massive Corviknight, its metallic feathers gleaming even in the violet light, was dive-bombing the town's bell tower, its rage absolute. Its eyes glowed with the same unnatural energy as the rift. "Everyone stay back!" Ash yelled. He didn't reach for a pokeball. Instead, he stood his ground, his eyes locked on the descending Pokémon. He pushed aside the noise, the fear, the chaos. He focused, reaching out with something deeper than sight, a sense he had honed through countless encounters with legendary and mythical Pokémon. It was his aura, a faint, blue shimmer that was almost invisible to the naked eye. He didn't project power, he projected calm. He projected understanding. "I see your fear. I feel your pain. You're not the enemy." The Corviknight screeched, pulling up its dive just feet from him, its powerful talons churning the air. It hovered there, its massive body trembling with rage and confusion. It saw not a threat, but a steady presence that was not afraid. The frantic glow in its eyes flickered. Slowly, deliberately, Ash held out his hand. "It's okay," he said, his voice soft but firm. "The danger is in the woods. Not here. It's okay." For a long, tense moment, the giant bird Pokémon stared at him. Then, with a final, mournful cry, it turned and flew back towards the Weald, its flight less frantic, more deliberate. A collective sigh of relief went through the crowd of onlookers. Sonia stared, her mouth slightly agape. She had read about Aura Guardians in history books, but to see it in practice, to see Ash command respect from a frenzied Pokémon with nothing but his own will, it was something else. Entirely. The tide had turned. With Ash directing them, the local trainers and rangers managed to corral the remaining Pokémon, gently herding them out of Wealdstone and back toward the ominous glow of the forest. The immediate danger had passed, but the source of the problem remained. Ash stood, breathing heavily, his jacket singed and his face smudged with soot. He looked past the town, to the pulsing, violet wound in the sky. The low hum was a constant, agonizing thrum. "I have to go in there," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. Sonia ran up to him. "Ash, no. You can't. We don't know what that thing is. The energy readings are off the charts. It could tear you apart." "If I don't, it will tear this whole region apart," he replied, his gaze unwavering. "This isn't random. Something is calling for help. Or something is trying to break free." He looked at Pikachu, who chirped in agreement, his tiny paw resting on Ash's cheek. "We've done this before, buddy. He gave Sonia a last, reassuring look. Keep everyone here. Make sure they're safe. Before she could protest further, he turned and sprinted towards the slumbering Weald. He plunged into the misty entryway, disappearing from sight as if swallowed by the ancient woods. Inside, the world was a nightmare. The familiar, misty paths were gone, replaced by a disorienting landscape of twisted trees and floating rocks. The air was thick and tasted of ozone and static. Colors bled into one another, green leaves shimmering with purple light, the gray mist swirling with veins of sickly yellow. Time felt sticky. A step could take a second or a minute. Ash pushed onward, guided by the intensifying hum and the pull in his gut. His senses were screaming, but his resolve was a shield against the temporal and spatial chaos. He and Pikachu were an island of stability in a sea of madness. He recalled Gengar, not wanting to subject his Pokémon to the unnatural distortion for too long. This was a path he had to walk alone. Finally, he broke through the disorienting woods into the clearing he remembered from years ago. In the center, half buried in the mossy earth, were the rusted sword and shield. And above them, the rift pulsed and writhed, a vortex of raw, untamed energy. The grass beneath it was dead, turned to gray ash. As he stepped into the clearing, two forms materialized from the mist. They were ethereal, made of shimmering blue and crimson light, ghostly apparitions of the two great wolves, Zacian and Zamazenta. Their eyes were ancient and piercing, and they held no weapons, only an immense, sorrowful presence. They didn't growl or attack. They simply stared at him, and Ash felt a profound weight settle on his mind. It wasn't a physical force, but a psychic one, a deep, resonant query that bypassed words and language. Who are you? Visions flooded his mind, not his own memories, but echoes of Galar's history. He saw the first darkest day, a sky black with storm clouds and the monstrous form of Eternatus raining down destruction. He saw the original two heroes, wielding sword and shield, standing against the abyss. He felt their desperation, their sacrifice. Then the visions shifted, becoming personal. The spirits delved into his own past. He was standing before a petrified Mutwo, offering himself in its place. He was on the crumbling peak of the spear pillar, facing down Dialga and Palkia as they tore reality apart. He was shielding his friends from Lyssandra's final, desperate attack. They showed him his triumphs, but they also showed him his failures, the battles lost, the friends he couldn't save in time, the moments of doubt and despair. They were searching for the core of him, peeling back the layers of a hero to see the man beneath. Power is offered. A crown is forged. Why should it be you? Would you take it for glory? For strength? To rule? The final vision was the most potent. The spirits showed him Galar, peaceful and thriving. Then, they showed it to him engulfed in a new, darker fire. The faces of Leon, Sonia, and all the people he had just protected in Wieldstone appeared, twisted in fear and pain. And before him, a throne materialized, gleaming and powerful. The silent offer was clear: take the throne, take the power, and save them. Or refuse, and watch them burn. It was a cruel test. A choice between ambition and selflessness. But for Ash, it wasn't a choice at all. He ignored the throne. He walked forward, into the heart of the fiery vision, his arms outstretched as if to shield the entire region with his own body. He didn't want a crown. He didn't want a throne. He just wanted to protect. It was the only answer he had ever known. I don't want to rule. I want to help. The fiery vision shattered. The psychic pressure receded. The ghostly forms of Zacian and Zamazenta seemed to nod in unison, a gesture of profound approval. They had found what they were looking for, a heart that did not seek power, but accepted responsibility. A will not to conquer, but to defend. They drifted forward, their misty forms converging on him. The crimson spirit touched the back of his right hand, and the blue spirit touched his left. A searing, impossibly cold light flared, white and absolute. Ash cried out, falling to one knee as a sensation like liquid starlight poured into him, etching itself onto his very soul. When the light faded, he was kneeling, panting, sweat beading on his forehead. The rift above was gone. The sky was a normal, overcast gray. The hum had ceased. The forest was silent and still once more. He looked down at his right hand. There, glowing with a soft, silver light that seemed to shine from beneath his skin, was an intricate crest. It was a design of a stylized wolf's head intertwined with a shield and a sword. It felt warm to the touch, a part of him. He had been chosen. Miles away, in the crumbling, shadow-draped ruins of a forgotten castle in the wild area, a man watched the last vestiges of violet energy fade from a scrying pool of black, glassy water. He was tall and regal, with sharp features and eyes the color of a winter sky. Dressed in immaculate, dark nobleman's attire, he was a stark contrast to the decay around him. This was Lord Valerius. A cloaked figure knelt beside him. "My lord. The rift has closed. The energy signature has stabilized." Valerius did not look away from the pool. A slow, cold smile touched his lips. He had felt the shift, the anointing of a new power in the land. "So, the false heroes have chosen their puppet," he mused, his voice a smooth, cultured baritone that held no trace of concern. "An outsider. How typical of their sentimental, flawed judgment. Shall we act, my lord? Shall we strike him down before he can establish himself?" the follower asked, their voice eager. Valerius raised a hand, a gesture that was both elegant and absolute. "No. Let him have his moment. Let him play with his crown and his fables of light. The people of Galar have been fed these weak, comfortable lies for too long." He finally looked away from the water, his gaze turning to a massive, sealed stone door at the far end of the ruin, a door that pulsed with a faint, dark power of its own. "Our work continues. The puppet will serve his purpose. He will unite the land's pillars, just as the ancient laws demand. He will gather Galar's strength, its lifeblood, and its spirit into one place." Valerius's smile turned predatory. "And when he does, it will make them that much easier for a true king to claim. The endless night is coming, and it will be glorious." "A king?" Ash repeated, staring at the glowing mark on his hand as if it belonged to someone else. "Sonia, that's crazy." They were back in her lab. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving behind a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. Pikachu was curled up in his lap, fast asleep, drained from the ordeal. Outside, the sun had begun to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. Sonia, however, was a whirlwind of frantic energy. She had books spread open across every available surface, her eyes darting between ancient Galarian script and her computer screen. "It's not crazy, Ash, it's history. It's legend," she exclaimed, pointing to a passage in a massive, weathered tome. "Listen to this. When the land groans under a fractured sky, and the spirits of the Weald cry out in pain, the twin heroes shall seek a heart worthy of the crown. Not a scion of blood, nor a child of Galar, but a soul of pure resolve. Upon them they shall bestow the mark, and they shall be king." She looked at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of academic fervor and sheer disbelief. "The mark of the king, Ash. That's what's on your hand. You didn't just close a rift. You passed a test that hasn't been administered in over 1,000 years." Ash looked from the mark to Sonia's wild-eyed expression. It felt surreal, like a dream. He was a Pokémon trainer. A champion, yes. But a king? The word felt foreign, heavy. But, a king of what? Galar has a chairman, a league, that's the point. Sonia continued, her excitement growing. The chairman is a political position. This is something else. It's a metaphysical mantle. According to these texts, the king is bonded to the very soul of the region. Your power, Galar's power, it's all connected now. She paused, her expression suddenly becoming grave as she read further down the page. Oh, this is complicated. What is it? Ash asked, a sense of dread creeping over him. Sonia took a deep breath. The king's power is not absolute upon his choosing. The crown is incomplete. The law is explicit. For the king to be whole, for his power to be fully realized and the land to be truly shielded, he must unite the three pillars upon which Galar stands. He must form a sacred pact, a binding union, with the land's strength, its lifeblood, and its spirit. Ash just stared at her, completely lost. Pillars? What pillars? Sonia pointed to three corresponding crests below the main text. One was a fist of stone, another a crashing wave, and the third a shadowy, defiant silhouette. They're not things, Ash. They're people. Or rather, they are titles, passed down through certain bloodlines or granted to individuals who perfectly embody those concepts. The text says the pillars are Galar's martial might, its coastal and economic vitality, and the resilient heart of its common people. For the king's rule to be legitimate, he has to marry them. The room went silent. Ash's brain, which could process the complex physics of a Z-move and the split-second timing of a high-stakes battle, ground to a halt. Marry, he finally managed to say, the word coming out as a choked whisper. Marry, three people. That's what it says, Sonia confirmed, her voice now hushed. A union of strength, lifeblood, and spirit. It's the only way to stabilize the king's power and, by extension, the entire region. Without it, the mark on your hand is just a beacon, and the power it channels will remain wild and potentially catastrophic. Like what we saw today, but everywhere. The news spread faster than a wildfire in the Galar mines. Sonia had contacted Leon, who in turn had contacted the current chairman, Lord Cadogan. An emergency session of the Galar League Council was called. Within hours, the highest echelons of the region were in an uproar. In a stark, minimalist dojo in Stow-on-Side, the air smelled of sweat, discipline, and fighting spirit. B, the formidable fighting-type gym leader, was in the middle of a session, her movements a blur of precision and power as she sparred with her Macamp. Her focus was absolute, her expression a mask of stony concentration. The session was interrupted by a man in a crisp suit, a formal messenger from Winden, who stood silently at the edge of the dojo until she acknowledged him. She took the offered data pad, her breathing not even slightly labored. Her eyes scanned the official summons, her impassive mask never slipping. But as she read the ancient law, her hand, wrapped in white tape, clenched into a fist so tight her knuckles turned white. The Pillar of Strength. The title was an honor passed down in her family for generations. A duty. A burden. This was, an unexpected complication to that duty. She gave a curt nod to the messenger, dismissing him. Her gaze drifted back to her Macamp. A challenge had been issued, not on the battlefield, but by fate itself. Miles away, on the vibrant docks of Holbury, the salty air was filled with the cries of wind gull and the flashes of camera strobes. Nessa, the watertight gym leader and celebrated model, was the picture of cool elegance, posing against the backdrop of the setting sun. Her public smile was radiant, effortless. An aide scurried to her side, handing her a tablet with an urgent message. 5 minutes, everyone, she called out, her voice smooth as silk. She stepped away from the crew, her smile vanishing the second she was out of frame. She read the summons from Chairman Cadogan. Her perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose slightly. The Pillar of Lifeblood. It was an old, almost forgotten honorific tied to her family's long-standing influence over Galar's coasts and trade. She had always viewed it as a charming piece of history, a bit of romantic folklore. Now, it was a political reality. Her sharp mind, which could see the shifting currents of both the ocean and public opinion, began turning, calculating the angles, the risks, the immense, unprecedented opportunities. And in the neon-drenched, perpetually shadowed streets of Spikemuth, Marnie was sitting on a crate, sharing a bag of chips with her Morpico. The air was thick with the sounds of punk rock and the low grumble of her hometown. A nervous-looking man in an expensive suit, looking utterly out of place, approached her hesitantly. He held out a sealed envelope. She took it, eyeing him with suspicion. "What's this then?" she asked, her accent thick and defiant. She tore it open and read the summons. A humorless laugh escaped her lips. "The Pillar of Spirit? Sacred Union? Is this some kinda joke?" She crumpled the letter, ready to toss it into a nearby bin. The voice of the people. As if the toffs in Winden knew the first thing about the people. "The chairman insists," the man said, his voice trembling slightly under her glare. "It is a matter of national security, Miss Marnie." She paused, the crumpled paper still in her hand. National security. That was a phrase they used when they wanted something, usually at the expense of places like Spikemouth. But there was a different weight to it this time. She uncrumpled the letter, her dark eyes scanning the words again. If this was real, if this outsider, king, was really coming, then the people, her people, would need a voice at that table. A fist, more like. The throne room in Winden Castle was a cavern of intimidating grandeur. Soaring stone arches, stained glass windows. Depicting legendary battles, and a ceiling so high it seemed to touch the clouds. At the far end, on a dais, sat Chairman Cadogan and a council of grim-faced lords and ladies who looked as ancient as the castle stones. Nessa, and Marnie stood before them. They were an odd, discordant trio. Stood ramrod straight, her arms crossed, a pillar of immovable stone. Nessa was poised and still, her expression unreadable, a deep ocean of calm calculation. Marnie slouched, her hands in her pockets, radiating a defiant energy that was a stark contrast to the room's oppressive formality. Lord Cadogan had just finished his solemn, grave explanation of the ancient law, his voice echoing in the cavernous hall. The reality of the situation hung in the air, heavy and unbelievable. Then, the great oak doors at the far end of the hall swung open. Ash Ketchum walked in. He had been given a formal tunic to wear, but he wore it like it was a foreign object, uncomfortably and without ceremony. He hadn't tried to style his perpetually messy black hair. He was not a prince. He was not a lord. He was just Ash. His steps were steady as he walked the long aisle, his gaze sweeping over the council, over the chairman, before finally coming to rest on the three young women standing before the dais. He saw the challenge in the fighters' eyes, the cool assessment in the models, the fierce distrust in the punk girls. The weight of what Sonia had told him, of what this all meant, settled onto his shoulders. It was heavier than any loss, more daunting than any legendary Pokémon. The fate of an entire region, a crown he never asked for, and a pact with three strangers who looked at him as if he were an invader. The glowing mark on his hand pulsed with a soft, steady light, a silent testament to the impossible truth. He was Ash Ketchum. And he was, by some twist of fate he was only beginning to comprehend, the King of Galar. Chapter 2, The Trial of Stone and Sinew. The city of Stow-on-Side was carved from the Galar region's very bones. It was a place of stark, vertical beauty, with buildings clinging to the sides of a great gorge, connected by a web of rickety bridges and steep, winding staircases. The air here was different from the soft, damp air of Wedgehurst. It was thin, dry, and carried the constant, faint scent of dust and ozone from the training grounds that dotted the landscape like scars. This was a city built on discipline, a monument to the fighting spirit. And right now, that spirit was aimed squarely at Ash Ketchum. He felt it the moment he arrived. There was no official welcome. No cheering crowds. Just stares. From the windows of the stone houses, from the merchants in their cliffside stalls, from the martial artists pausing their katas in open-air dojos, he was met with a uniform, silent judgment. The stares were hard, like the granite of the gorge. They measured him, weighed him, and found him wanting. The news of the outsider, king, had arrived before he had, and it had been received not as a miracle, but as an insult. Ash walked through the city, flanked by two of the chairman's formal guards who looked deeply uncomfortable in the hostile atmosphere. Pikachu was on his shoulder, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced by a low, wary tension, his ears constantly swiveling. Ash, however, projected an aura of unnerving calm. He met the hostile gazes without flinching, his expression not arrogant, but open and steady. He had walked into hostile towns before. This was just another Tuesday. Their destination was the main Galar Karate Dojo, a sprawling complex at the highest point of the city, its entrance marked by two towering statues of a Macamp. Inside, the main training hall was vast, its wooden floors polished to a mirror shine by generations of bare feet. The walls were lined with weapons and scrolls. At the far end of the hall, kneeling on a simple mat, was Bee. She was the picture of control, her posture perfect, her hands resting on her knees. Her usual gym attire had been replaced by a more formal, stark white GI, her long hair tied back in a severe bun. Surrounding her, also kneeling, were a dozen of the most respected martial arts masters in Galar. They were old, their faces lined with the maps of 1,000 battles, their knuckles scarred and thickened. They were the living history of Galar's strength, and their collective disapproval was a physical force in the room. Ash dismissed his guards with a nod and walked forward, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous silence. He stopped 10 feet from Bee, Pikachu hopping down to stand beside him. For a long moment, no one spoke. It was a contest of wills, a silent battle waged across the polished floor. It was Bee who broke the silence, her voice as clipped and precise as one of her karate chops. "You are Ash Ketchum." It was a statement, not a question. "I am," Ash replied, his voice even. "The legends of my family speak of the king's return," she said, her gray eyes unwavering. "They speak of a sacred duty bestowed upon the one who embodies the pillar of strength. That duty is to stand by the king's side, to be his unbreakable shield." She paused, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "The legends do not mention the king being a foreigner who stumbled into a crown he did not earn." A murmur of assent rippled through the assembled masters. An old man with a long white beard and the physique of a Holucha spoke up, his voice a low growl. "The strength of Galar is forged here, in our mountains, through our discipline. It cannot be imported. It cannot be bestowed by ghosts in a forest." Ash listened, his expression unchanged. He understood their anger. They were warriors, proud of their heritage. Their entire lives were dedicated to the pursuit of a strength they had to build, piece by painful piece. His felt, given. Unearned. "I didn't ask for this," Ash said simply. "But the mark is on my hand, and a town was nearly destroyed. A threat is coming to Galar. I'm here to do whatever it takes to protect this region." "Protect?" Bea's voice was laced with ice. "You have a powerful reputation as a trainer, that much is true. But the king of Galar must be more than a good battler. He must embody its spirit. Its fortitude. Its honor. These are things that must be proven. They cannot be claimed." She rose to her feet in a single, fluid motion. "The martial community of Galar does not recognize your authority. We do not accept you. But our traditions allow for a path. A trial." Her eyes narrowed, issuing a challenge as sharp as a blade. "If you wish for us to even consider acknowledging your title, if you wish for me to consider this union, you will submit to the gauntlet of Stoonside. You will prove your worth. Not with legends or marks, but with stone and sinew. With your own body, and the bonds you share with your Pokémon." "What is this gauntlet?" Ash asked, his focus zeroing in on the challenge. This, he understood. A trial. A test. The old master spoke again. "It is a series of 3 trials, designed to break the unworthy. It tests endurance, strategy, and spirit. No one has attempted it in a generation. No one has completed it in a century. If you fail, you will leave Stow onside and renounce any claim to the Pillar of Strength. Your kingship will be forever incomplete. The threat was clear. Fail, and his ability to protect Galar would be crippled from the start. And if I succeed? Ash asked. Bea's expression was grim. If you succeed, you will have earned the right to face me. The final trial is a full battle against the current Pillar of Strength. Succeed there, and you will have our respect. And my allegiance. It was a monumental task, designed to be impossible. They expected him to refuse, to be intimidated. They expected him to argue his position as king. Ash looked at the hard, unyielding faces around him. He looked at Bea, at the fierce pride burning in her eyes. Then he smiled, a small, confident quirk of his lips. I accept. The first trial began at dawn. It was called the Serpent's Ascent. A narrow, treacherous path that snaked its way up the sheer face of the gorge opposite the city. There were no ropes, no safety nets. Just crumbling rock, slick with morning dew, and a 1,000-foot drop to the river below. The trial was not merely to climb it, but to do so while being harried by the mountain's wild Pokémon, agitated by the dojo's masters. It was a test of raw, physical endurance. Ash stood at the base of the cliff, stretching his arms. He wore light training gear, his jacket tied around his waist. He looked up, tracing the near-invisible path with his eyes. A group of masters watched from a ledge across the chasm, their figures small and remote. Bea stood among them, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. The trial ends when you reach the summit, one of the judges at the base explained gruffly. There is no time limit. Most quit from exhaustion or fall. Ash just nodded. He looked at Pikachu. Stay with them, buddy. I need to do this part myself. Pika. Pikachu tilted his head, his ears drooping with worry. I'll be fine, Ash said, giving him a reassuring scratch under the chin. It's just a little climbing. He started the ascent. The first 100 feet were deceptively easy, with ample handholds and footholds. But then the path narrowed, the rock becoming smoother, more treacherous. The wind whipped through the gorge, trying to tear him from his perch. He moved with a surprising economy of motion, a climber's grace that belied his powerful frame. He found his rhythm, his breathing steady, his focus absolute. The world narrowed to the few feet of rock in front of him. Then came the harassment. A volley of small pebbles rained down from above, sent cascading by a trainer's graveler. Ash pressed himself flat against the rock face, waiting for the miniature landslide to pass before continuing. He didn't shout or curse. He just adapted. A wild squovet, bolder than it should have been, darted out from a crevice, trying to snatch the ration pack on his belt. Ash didn't even look at it. He simply shifted his weight, causing the Pokémon to misjudge its leap and scamper away in frustration. He climbed for hours. His muscles burned. His fingers were raw. The sun beat down on him, and sweat dripped into his eyes. From her vantage point, Bea watched his progress. She had expected him to struggle, to show the strain. He was a Pokémon trainer, not a mountaineer. But he just kept going, his pace slowing but never stopping. He moved with a relentless, stubborn determination that she recognized. It was the same will to persevere that she cultivated in herself. It was irritating. Halfway up, the true test began. A phalanx patrol, disturbed by his presence, marched out onto a narrow ledge he needed to cross. The 6 small creatures, linked by their warrior spirit, lowered their shields and pointed their horns, blocking his path. They were a living, breathing wall of defiance. Down below, the judges murmured. This was where most would be forced to use a Pokémon. But Ash hadn't brought any. Ash stopped, his feet balanced precariously on the ledge. He didn't see them as an obstacle. He saw them as soldiers guarding their territory. He held up his empty hands, a gesture of peace. "I'm just passing through," he said, his voice carried on the wind. "I mean you no harm." The lead phalanx, the brass, let out a sharp cry, unconvinced. Ash stayed perfectly still. He didn't try to intimidate them or push past them. He just waited. He respected their space. For a full minute, he remained there, a quiet, non-threatening presence. The wind howled around them. Slowly, the tension in the phalanx patrol eased. They saw no aggression in him, no challenge. The brass issued another, softer cry. As one, the 6 creatures raised their shields and marched back into their crevice, granting him passage. Across the chasm, BEA's eyes widened slightly. He hadn't beaten them. He had earned their passage. It was a subtle distinction, but in the world of martial honor, it was everything. When Ash finally hauled himself over the top edge of the summit, his body was screaming with exhaustion. He lay on the flat, sun-baked rock for a long moment, his chest heaving. He had done it. He pushed himself up, his muscles trembling, and looked across the gorge. The small figures of the masters were gone. Only Bee remained. She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod, then turned and walked away. The second trial took place that afternoon, in a sunken arena known as the Arena of Three Fists. It was a strategy trial, but with a brutal twist. Ash would face 3 of Stow-on-Side's finest dojo masters at the same time. It wasn't a rotation, it was a 3-on-1 assault. Victory wasn't about overpowering one opponent, but managing 3. Ash stood in the center of the circular sand pit, the 3 masters taking their positions around him. The stands above were filled with silent, watching martial artists. Bee sat in a place of honor, her expression as stern as ever. Nessa and Marnie had arrived from Winden, having heard of the trial. Nessa watched with a cool, analytical curiosity, as if observing a complex business negotiation. Marnie leaned forward, her elbows on her knees, a look of grudging interest on her face. She'd come expecting to see the outsider fail spectacularly. She was beginning to have doubts. "The rules are simple," the announcer called out. "Each master will use 1 Pokémon. You may use 3. The battle ends when all of one side's Pokémon are unable to battle. Begin." The 3 masters sent out their Pokémon simultaneously. A Hitmonlee, its legs like coiled springs. A Hitmonchan, its gloved fists already jabbing the air. And a powerful, barrel-chested Throw, who immediately took a solid, unmovable stance. Ash took a deep breath. Chaos management. He tossed his 3 Pokeballs. Jengar. Surfetched. Lucario. I need your help. Jengar materialized with a cackle, its shadowy form already sinking into the sand. Surfetched appeared with a noble cry, its leaklance held at the ready. Lucario landed in a crouch, its crimson eyes glowing as it immediately extended its aura, sensing the flow of the entire battlefield. A ghost type? A strange choice for a fight against pure martial prowess, one of the masters scoffed. Ash ignored him. Jengar, use hypnosis on Hitmonchan. Surfetched, meteor assault on Throw, full power. Lucario, stay close, use Aura Sphere to keep Hitmonlee off balance. The battlefield erupted. Jengar's eyes glowed, sending hypnotic waves towards the boxer Pokémon. Surfetched charged, its leak glowing with immense power, straight at the seemingly immovable Throw. Lucario fired off a rapid series of blue energy spheres, forcing the nimble Hitmonlee to backpedal and dodge rather than attack. The masters were skilled. Hitmonchan's trainer yelled, "Focus punch. Break through it." Hitmonchan's glove began to glow, its intense focus shattering the psychic suggestion before it could take hold. The Thrower's trainer smirked. Circle Throw. Just as Surfetched was about to connect with its powerful charge, the Throw braced itself, caught the duck Pokémon in a grip of iron, and with a mighty heave, spun and launched Surfetched not at the wall, but directly at Lucario. It was a brilliant tactical move, using Ash's own Pokémon against him. But Ash's mind worked faster. Lucario, don't dodge. Catch him. Gengar, now. Phantom Force. Lucario, trusting its trainer implicitly, braced itself. Instead of dodging the feathered missile, it caught Surfetched, the impact sending them both sliding back several feet. In that split second of chaos, Gengar vanished into the shadows. The Masters were momentarily confused. Their coordinated attack had been countered in an unexpected way. Where did it go? The Hitmonlee's trainer muttered. Look out, the Hitmonchan's trainer yelled. Gengar reappeared directly behind Hitmonchan, its eyes gleaming with malice. Before the Pokémon could react, Gengar unleashed a point-blank Shadow Ball that sent the boxer flying. It wasn't a knockout blow, but it was disorienting and powerful. Surfetched, brutal swing. Clear some space. Ash commanded. Surfetched, back on its feet, spun its massive leak in a wide, dark arc, forcing all three opponents to leap back and breaking their coordinated formation. He's not fighting them, Nessa murmured from the stands, her fingers steepled. He's separating them. He's refusing to let them fight as a unit. Marnie grunted. Clever. The battle raged on. It was a masterclass in battlefield control. Ash used Gengar's ghostly abilities to constantly reposition, to attack from unexpected angles, sowing confusion. He used Surfetched as a focused spearhead, breaking stances and forcing defensive moves. And he used Lucario as his anchor, its aura sense allowing it to predict and counter incoming attacks, protecting its teammates with uncanny precision. He wasn't just giving commands, he and Lucario were in perfect sync. A flick of Ash's wrist was all Lucario needed to know to shift its position. A slight change in his stance, and Lucario would prepare for a defensive maneuver. It was like they shared one mind. Bea watched, her stoic facade beginning to crack. This wasn't the brute force she had expected from a famous champion. This was intricate, adaptable, and brilliant. He was turning their strength, their coordination, into a weakness, forcing them into 3 separate one-on-one skirmishes where he could dictate the terms. The tide turned when Throw finally managed to grab Lucario, preparing for a devastating seismic toss. Don't let it, yelled the Hitmonlee's trainer, moving in to support. Too late. Ash countered. Lucario, use my aura. Reversal, now. Lucario's eyes blazed. A wave of blue energy, Ash's own aura, visibly flowed from trainer to Pokémon. Supercharged by the damage it had taken and empowered by its bond with Ash, Lucario's body erupted in a wave of fighting energy. The reversal, a move that grew stronger the more injured the user was, blasted out at point-blank range. The throw, caught completely by surprise by the sheer power, was thrown back, landing in a heap, unable to battle. One down. The arena fell silent. He had used his own life force to power his Pokémon. It was a technique spoken of only in the oldest scrolls. Now it was 2-on-2, and the advantage was Ash's. Without their anchor, Hitmonchan and Hitmonlee were quickly outmaneuvered. Surfetched's relentless assault pinned Hitmonlee, and Gengar's tricky illusions left Hitmonchan swinging at shadows until a final Shadow Ball finished the job. It was over. Ash stood breathing heavily, the use of his aura having taken a small toll. His Pokémon were battered but victorious. He walked to the center of the arena and bowed, first to his Pokémon, then to the 3 defeated masters. A magnificent battle, he said, his voice ringing with sincerity. Thank you. The masters, though defeated, looked at him with a newfound respect. They bowed back. From the stands, a single person began to clap. It was Marnie. A few others hesitantly joined in, until a wave of scattered, grudging applause filled the arena. Bea did not clap. She simply watched him, her mind re-evaluating everything she thought she knew about the Boy King. The third and final trial was not one of body or strategy, but of spirit. It took place in a quiet, secluded chamber deep within the dojo, known as the Chamber of the Silent Master. There were no crowds, only Ash, Bee, and the Council of Elders. In the center of the room, sitting on a massive stone pedestal, was a conkeldurr. It was ancient, its skin like weathered leather, its muscles like petrified wood. The two concrete pillars it held were worn smooth with age. Its eyes were closed, and it hadn't moved in what was said to be 50 years, subsisting on some unknown inner energy. This was the dojo's most sacred ancestor, a living symbol of their history. The silent master has grown, agitated in its slumber, the old master explained, his voice hushed. Its spirit is troubled. Many have tried to soothe it. All have failed. Your trial is to bring peace to its heart. You may not battle it. You may not command it. You must simply calm it. This was their ultimate test. A problem that could not be solved with force. They expected him to fail, to prove that his spirit was not in tune with the deep traditions of Galar's martial heart. Ash looked at the great Pokemon. He could feel its turmoil, a low, rumbling psychic pain that emanated from it like heat. It wasn't anger. It was loneliness. A deep, profound isolation that had festered over decades of immobility. He didn't approach it. He didn't speak. He simply walked to the opposite side of the chamber, sat down on the cold stone floor, and closed his eyes. Pikachu sat beside him, mirroring his posture. The elders exchanged confused glances. Bee watched him, a frown creasing her brow. What was he doing? Ash wasn't doing anything. He was just being. He extended his aura, not as a probe or a command, but as a quiet offering. He didn't try to force a connection. He just let his own presence, his own spirit, be known. He projected the calm of the forest after a storm, the quiet patience of waiting for a Pokemon to hatch, the simple, profound connection he felt with all living things. He broadcasted a single, simple thought, over and over. You are not alone. Minutes stretched into an hour. The chamber was utterly silent save for the faint, rhythmic breathing of its occupants. The elders grew restless. This was not what they had expected. Then, a low groan echoed through the chamber. The conkeldurr's brow twitched. Its massive fingers, wrapped around its pillars, flexed for the first time in decades. A wave of psychic frustration washed through the room. It was the pain of a body that could no longer move, of a warrior spirit trapped in an immobile shell. Ash flinched as the wave of pain hit him, but he held his ground. He didn't recoil. He accepted the pain, acknowledged it, and in return, broadcasted a wave of empathy. I hear you. I understand. Slowly, incredibly, the ancient conkeldurr's head turned, a fraction of an inch at a time, its movements stiff and cracking like old stone. Its eyes, cloudy with age, opened. They were not focused on the elders who had tended to its shrine for years. They were focused on the young man sitting silently across the room. The psychic turmoil emanating from the conkeldurr lessened. The low, pained groan softened into a quiet, resonant hum. A sense of peace, fragile but real, began to settle over the chamber. The silent master, for the first time in memory, looked calm. It had been acknowledged. It had been heard. Ash opened his eyes and slowly got to his feet. He bowed deeply to the conkeldurr, which seemed to dip its head in a barely perceptible return gesture. The old master stared, his mouth agape. By the stones of the gorge. How? He was lonely, Ash said softly, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. He turned to leave the chamber. He had passed. Bee was waiting for him outside, in the main hall. The setting sun cast long shadows across the floor. You have passed the 3 trials, she said, her voice devoid of its earlier ice. It was now neutral, observational. You have shown endurance, strategy, and a spirit that is unexpected. But the gauntlet is not complete. She gestured to the center of the hall. Now, you face me. The final battle. Ash was exhausted, his body aching, his mind weary, his aura drained. But a familiar fire lit in his eyes. "I'm ready," he said. The duel was declared. No Gigantamaxing. No Z moves. Just a pure, one-on-one battle. Skill against skill. B sent out her grapplock, a whirlwind of tentacles and grappling fury. Ash countered with his holucha, a flash of aerial brilliance. It was a spectacular dance of contrasting styles. Grapplock tried to lock holucha down with Octolock, while holucha used its speed and flying press to stay just out of reach, delivering stinging blows. It was a close, acrobatic match, but holucha's aerial dominance eventually won out, a final, decisive high jump kick ending the bout. B recalled her Pokémon without a word, her expression unreadable. She threw her second Pokeball. Macamp. Let's go. Her ace appeared, its 4 powerful arms flexing. It was a specimen of pure power, the culmination of a lifetime of training. Ash looked at his partner. Pikachu. I choose you. A ripple of surprise went through the onlookers. Her strongest Pokémon against his smallest. A bold choice, B stated. Let's see if it is a foolish one. Macamp, strength. The battle was a blur of speed versus power. Machamp's four-armed assault was relentless, its punches powerful enough to shatter stone. But Pikachu was a golden phantom, weaving between the blows, too fast to be pinned down. He used Iron Tail to parry, Electro-Ebb to slow, and Thunderbolt to sting. Ash and Pikachu were in perfect sync, a partnership honed over a decade of battles across the world. They didn't need words. Ash would see an opening, and Pikachu would already be moving to exploit it. B was a phenomenal trainer, her commands precise and strategic. She pushed them hard. Macamp landed a heavy-handed cross-chop that sent Pikachu flying. It used bulk up to increase its already monstrous power. It was a grueling, attritional fight. Finish it, Macamp. Dynamic punch. B commanded, seeing an opening. Machamp's fist glowed with a volatile, orange energy as it lunged forward for the final blow. Now, Pikachu. Ash yelled. Volt tackle. Instead of dodging, Pikachu charged forward, becoming a missile of pure, destructive electricity. They met in the center of the hall. The resulting explosion of power was immense, shaking the entire dojo. Smoke and dust filled the air. When it cleared, both Pokémon were still standing, but only just. They were panting, bruised, and utterly exhausted. Incredible, Nessa breathed from the sidelines. Both of them, Marnie whispered, on the edge of her seat. B gritted her teeth, sweat beading on her forehead. Macamp, we are the pillar of strength. We do not fall. Close combat. Ash's eyes hardened. Pikachu. Quick attack, dodge and use Iron Tail on its knee. It was a desperate, risky gambit. Macamp unleashed a furious storm of punches, a blur of fists that filled Pikachu's entire world. Pikachu, running on pure instinct and trust, dove into the storm. He dodged the first punch by a hair, the wind from the blow rustling his fur. He ducked under a second, slid past a third. He was taking a massive risk, but it paid off. For a fraction of a second, he was inside Machamp's guard. His tail glowed with a metallic sheen, and he swung it with the last of his strength, not at Machamp's chest or head, but at the side of its knee. It was a precise, tactical strike against its foundation. Machamp's knee buckled. Its barrage faltered. Its massive body, for the first time, was off balance. It's over. Ash declared. Thunderbolt. With a final, defiant cry, Pikachu unleashed all the electricity he had left. The bolt of lightning struck the giant Pokémon center mass. Macamp stood for a second, trembling, before its eyes rolled back and it crashed to the floor, defeated. Silence. Ash had won. He stood, chest heaving, watching his exhausted Pikachu sway on its feet. But he didn't cheer. He didn't pump his fist. The first thing he did was run forward. Not to Pikachu, but to the fallen Machamp. He knelt beside the massive Pokémon, placing a hand on its shoulder. "You were amazing," he said softly, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "Thank you for the battle." He then turned to Pikachu, scooping the little mouse up in his arms. "You did it, buddy. You were incredible." Bee stared. She watched him tend to her Pokémon before his own. She saw the deep, abiding respect he had not for victory, but for the fight itself, for the spirit of the Pokémon he had just defeated. In that single, selfless act, he had shown more honor than any victory speech could ever convey. She slowly walked forward and recalled her Machamp. She stood before Ash, her expression no longer stern or challenging. It was something new. Something complex. "I have dedicated my life to the pursuit of strength," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "I thought I understood it. Today, you have shown me a different kind." She looked him directly in the eye, and for the first time, he saw not a challenger, but a person. "The gauntlet is complete. You have my respect, Ash Ketchum. And you have my allegiance." She held out her hand. Ash, still holding Pikachu, shook it. Her grip was firm, solid. A pact had been sealed, not by law, but by combat and honor. That night, the atmosphere in Stow-on-Side had changed. The stares were still there, but they were no longer hostile. They were looks of awe, of respect. Ash was resting in a room provided by the dojo, the aches of the day finally setting in. He was looking out the window at the moonlit gorge when he felt it. A flicker of movement in the shadows below. A faint glint of metal. His senses, honed by years of danger, screamed. He didn't hesitate. He dove to the side, pulling a startled Pikachu with him. A split second later, a thin, black dart embedded itself in the wall where his head had been. It sizzled, a dark purple poison dripping from its tip. Ash rolled to his feet, his exhaustion replaced by a surge of adrenaline. Outside his window, a figure cloaked entirely in black was perched on the opposite roof, a long blowgun in its hand. A sleek, sinister Salazzle hissed beside it. Before Ash could even shout a command, his door burst open. It was Bee, still in her GI. Her eyes wide with alarm. She had been on her way to speak with him when she sensed the killing intent. "Get down," she yelled. The assassin was fast. The Salazzle spat a glob of potent venom at the window. Bee moved faster. She grabbed a heavy wooden training shield from the wall and blocked the glob, the wood smoking and dissolving where the venom hit. "Pikachu, Thunderbolt!" Ash commanded. A bolt of lightning shot from the window, but the assassin was already gone, disappearing into the labyrinthine shadows of the city. Ash and Bee ran to the window, searching the rooftops. Nothing. "An assassin?" Bee said, her voice tight with disbelief and fury. "Here. In my city." Ash's eyes were fixed on the street below. The assassin had been fast, but not flawless. In their hasty retreat, they had dropped something. A small, black object that glinted in the moonlight. He vaulted from the window, landing lightly on the street below. Bee followed a moment later. Ash knelt and picked up the object. It was a small, intricately carved emblem made of polished obsidian. It was shaped like a twisted, chaotic star. The same mark he had seen on the attacker who had tried to poison him after the battle in Stow-on-Side. He remembered the reports of Valerius's followers, the Shadow Disciples. This was their mark. Bee looked at the emblem, then at Ash. Her face was grim. This was not the work of a disgruntled master, she said, her voice low. This was professional. Organized. Ash closed his hand around the emblem. Their descent was just a cover, he realized. Someone used your city's pride to create a distraction, to get me to lower my guard. They stood there in the quiet street, the silence of the night feeling suddenly fragile. The political challenge had been met. But a new, deadlier conflict had just announced itself. B looked at Ash, at the obsidian emblem in his hand, and then at the fading sizzle mark on the wall of his room. Her duty as the pillar of strength had just become terrifyingly real. And her new king, the one she had just tested, was now the target of a hidden, ruthless enemy. They were no longer just adversaries who had found respect. They were allies in a war that had just begun. Chapter 3, The Politics of the Tide. The port of Holbury was dying. It was a slow, creeping death, one that stained the water a sickening shade of rust red and smelled of brine and decay. What was usually Galar's vibrant, bustling artery of commerce, a symphony of foghorns, shouting dockworkers, and the cries of wind gull, had fallen into an eerie, choked silence. Massive container ships sat anchored in the bay like beached whales, their hulls stained by the unnatural tide. Fishing trawlers were tied to their moorings, their nets hanging dry and useless. The famous Holbury seafood market was a ghost town, its stalls empty, the air thick with the worried murmurs of a city holding its breath. Nessa stood on the balcony of her office overlooking the harbor, a starkly modern glass and steel structure that jutted out over the water. Her public face, the one that graced magazine covers and smiled coolly from billboards, was gone. In its place was a mask of taut, controlled frustration. The phone pressed to her ear was hot against her skin. Lord Cadogan, with all due respect, sending another research team in 3 days is unacceptable, she said, her voice a low, dangerous current beneath a surface of forced politeness. My city is bleeding. The marine life is suffering. Galar's entire supply chain is grinding to a halt. I need action, not another subcommittee meeting. The voice on the other end was a drone of bureaucratic platitudes. These things take time, following procedure, must assess the environmental impact, assess the impact. Nessa cut in, her patience snapping. I am looking at the impact. There is a lapras stuck in the inner harbor that can barely lift its head, its skin covered in lesions. The local Magikarp population has been all but wiped out. They're calling it the Crimson Blight, and it's corrosive. It's eating through mooring ropes. I need solutions, not studies. She ended the call with a sharp tap of her finger, resisting the urge to hurl the device into the tainted water below. She was the pillar of lifeblood, a title her family had held for centuries. It had always been a source of pride, a symbol of their connection to the sea and their role in Galar's prosperity. Now, it felt like an anchor, dragging her down with her dying city. Her aide, a nervous young man named Finn, appeared at the door. Miss Nessa, the press is gathering at the lighthouse again. They want a statement. And the Fishermen's Union is demanding a meeting. Tell the press I will issue a statement this evening, she said, running a hand over her face. Schedule the union for an hour from now. And Finn, get me Professor Magnolia's direct line. If Wyndon won't act, I'll find someone who will. She was overwhelmed. Every problem that landed on her desk spawned 3 more. The environmental crisis was an economic disaster, which was rapidly becoming a political nightmare. Her rivals in the league were already whispering, questioning her leadership. She felt as though she were trying to hold back the tide with her bare hands, and the water was burning her skin. She turned back to the balcony, her sharp eyes scanning the rust-colored water, when a flash of yellow caught her eye. Down on the main pier, a small figure was kneeling at the edge, its long ears twitching. Beside it, a young man in a simple blue jacket crouched, dipping his fingers into the blighted water without hesitation. Nessa's eyes narrowed. It was him. Ash Ketchum. She hadn't seen him since the tense, surreal meeting in Wyndon. B had already sent a terse, formal message confirming she had accepted her role in the pact after he'd completed her absurd gauntlet. Now, it seemed, he had come to her domain. She braced herself for another political headache, another empty offer of royal support. He hadn't come with an entourage or a fanfare. He'd simply appeared, walking down the pier like any other traveler. She watched as he brought his damp fingers to his nose, his expression turning serious. Pikachu, his partner Pokémon, chattered with a worried tone, its cheeks sparking faintly with agitated energy. Deciding it was better to confront him on her own terms, Nessa descended from her office and made her way onto the docks. The few workers still milling about parted for her, their expressions a mixture of respect and desperate hope. Ash looked up as she approached. He stood, wiping his hand on his jeans. His eyes, she noted, were clear and direct. There was no artifice in them. Nessa, he greeted her with a simple nod. Ash, she replied, her tone cool and professional. I wasn't aware the Crown was making an official visit. He seemed to miss, or perhaps ignore, the barb in her tone. It's not. I came to see if I could help. He gestured to the water. Sonia told me what was happening. This isn't natural. I'm aware of that, she said, an edge to her voice. I have the best marine biologists in Galar working on it. Wyndon is consulting. They think it's an algae bloom, don't they? He asked, looking back at the water. But it's not. It doesn't feel alive. It feels manufactured. Nessa paused. That was an odd way to put it. Feels. But it resonated with what her own gut had been telling her. The blight didn't grow like a natural organism. It simply appeared, spreading in perfect, unnatural patterns, as if being poured into the sea. What do you mean, manufactured? She asked, her curiosity piqued despite herself. I've seen things like this before, he said, his gaze distant for a moment, as if recalling a dozen different crises from a dozen different regions. Unstable energy sources, malfunctioning technology, they can poison an environment. This stuff, he rubbed his fingers together, it has a faint electric charge to it. And it's uniform. Every drop is exactly the same. Nature isn't that neat. Pikachu chirped in agreement, pointing a small paw towards the open sea. Pikachu. For the first time in days, Nessa felt a flicker of something other than frustration. He wasn't spouting political nonsense. He was observing. Analyzing. He was treating the problem like a trainer assessing an unfamiliar Pokémon. My teams have been focusing on a biological cause, she admitted, her tone softening slightly. The energy readings have been chaotic, but we chalked it up to interference from the blight itself. Maybe the blight is the interference, Ash countered. Maybe the energy source is the real problem, and this is just a symptom. He looked at her, his expression earnest. You know these waters better than anyone. The currents, the topography. I have Pokémon that can handle the pressure and the toxicity, and I can sense things that your equipment might not pick up. Let us work together. You command from the surface, I'll lead a team below. It was a straightforward, practical offer. He wasn't trying to take over. He wasn't making a royal decree. He was asking to be a tool in her hands, a resource for her to direct. He was deferring to her expertise in her own territory. It was a shrewd political move, whether he realized it or not. She studied him for a long moment. The fate of her city rested on her shoulders. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. Fine, she said, her voice crisp and decisive. I have a command vessel, the tidal Grace. We can use it as our base of operations. But you will follow my instructions to the letter. This is my city, my water. Understood? A ghost of a smile touched Ash's lips. Understood, Captain. An hour later, the tidal Grace cut through the red-stained water, leaving a wake of sickly foam. It was a state-of-the-art research vessel, a testament to Nessa's influence, equipped with advanced sonar, water quality sensors, and a moon pool for submersible deployment. The deck was a hive of activity, but now it was a focused, purposeful energy. Nessa stood at the central command console, a headset on, her eyes scanning a dozen different readouts. She was in her element, a commander directing her forces. Currents are flowing south by southwest from the inner harbor, she announced, her voice echoing over the ship's comms. The blight concentration is highest along the Halcyon Trench. That's our starting point. Ash stood on the deployment platform, clad in a sleek, dark wetsuit. Beside him were 3 pokeballs. He looked up at the observation window where Nessa was coordinating, gave a thumbs up, and then dove into the moon pool's churning water with a clean splash. The world beneath the surface was a crimson hell. Visibility was less than 10 feet, the water thick with the particulate matter of the blight. It clung to his skin with a faint, stinging sensation. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the sound of his own breathing through the rebreather. Where there should have been schools of fin neon and patrolling Sharpedo, there was only a murky, red emptiness. Ash, can you hear me? Nessa's voice crackled through the comms in his ear. Your biometrics are stable, but the water's corrosivity is higher than we measured on the surface. Don't stay down too long. Copy that, he replied, his voice muffled. Sending out the team. He released his Pokemon. A powerful, sleek Kingler emerged, its massive claw snapping, ready for action. Then came Dracovish, its goofy, powerful form looking perfectly at home in the murky depths. Finally, a Pokemon he hadn't used in years emerged, its long, graceful neck cutting through the blight, his Lapras. It was larger and older than the one suffering in the harbor, and its presence was a calming, steadying force. A Lapras? Nessa's voice held a note of surprise. It's magnificent. An old friend, Ash said. She's tough. All right team, spread out but stay close. We're looking for anything that feels out of place. Kingler, you're on defense. Dracovish, you're the scout. Lapras, stay with me. They moved as a coordinated unit, a small bubble of life in the Dead Sea. Dracovish, with its immense speed and powerful legs, surged ahead, its primitive senses scanning the environment. Ash rode on Lapras's back, extending his aura, trying to filter out the cacophony of the blight's energy to find its source. It was like trying to hear a whisper in a hurricane. They followed the Halcyon Trench, a deep scar in the seabed. The blight grew thicker here, the water almost opaque. The skeletal remains of marine Pokemon littered the seafloor, a grim testament to the blight's lethality. Ash felt a surge of anger. Whatever was doing this, it was senseless. Cruel. Suddenly, Dracovish let out a panicked, gurgling cry and shot back towards them, its powerful body trembling. Dracovish, what is it? Ash asked, placing a calming hand on its head. Before the Pokemon could respond, a shadow blotted out what little light filtered down from the surface. A colossal shape emerged from the red murk. It was a Gyarados, but one twisted by the blight. Its scales, usually a majestic blue, were mottled with angry red patches. Its eyes burned with a mindless, agonized rage. A low, guttural roar vibrated through the water, a sound of pure pain. It opened its massive jaws and charged. Ash. Massive energy spike. It's going to attack. Nessa's voice was sharp with alarm. Kingler, Crab Hammer. Intercept it. Ash commanded. Kingler shot forward, its oversized claw glowing with power. It met the Gyarados' charge head-on. The impact was immense, sending a shockwave through the water that churned the seabed. Kingler was thrown back, but it had successfully blunted the attack. The Gyarados, enraged, whipped its tail, creating a powerful whirlpool that threatened to tear the team apart. Lapras, Ice Beam. Reinforce the trench wall. Ash yelled. Lapras unleashed a beam of absolute zero energy, not at the Gyarados, but at the sandy wall of the trench. A massive wall of ice instantly formed, shielding them from the worst of the whirlpool's pull. It was a brilliant defensive move, using the environment itself as a shield. On the tidal grace, Nessa watched the tactical display in awe. The energy signatures of Ash's Pokemon moved with a synergy she'd only ever seen in championship battles. He wasn't just fighting, he was controlling the entire underwater battle space. The Gyarados is in pain, Ash said over the comm, his voice tight. The blight is driving it crazy. I don't want to hurt it. He focused, pushing past the Gyarados' rage with his aura, just as he had with the Corviknight. He projected a wave of calm, a feeling of shared space, of a desire to help. I'm not your enemy. Let me help you. The Gyarados paused its assault, its massive head tilting. Its rage was a firestorm, but beneath it, Ash could feel a core of agony and confusion. The burning red in its eyes flickered. Dracovish, Vicious Rend. Ash ordered. Not on Gyarados. On the rock formation above it. Dracovish, understanding instantly, shot upwards. It clamped its absurdly powerful jaws onto a rocky outcropping directly above the enraged Pokémon. With a mighty wrench, it tore the formation loose. The large rocks tumbled down, not onto the Gyarados, but in front of it, creating a barrier that forced it back, away from them. It was another non-violent, tactical solution. The Gyarados, confused and blocked, eventually gave up the fight, its rage subsiding into exhausted misery as it disappeared back into the crimson gloom. Incredible, Nessa breathed, forgetting for a moment that she was on an open comm. It's heading deeper into the trench, Ash reported, his breathing heavy. I think it was guarding something. We're close. They pushed forward, the blight becoming so thick it was like moving through soup. The stinging sensation on Ash's skin intensified. And then he felt it. A clear, pulsing thrum that cut through the background noise. A steady, rhythmic beat of unnatural energy. I've got it, he said. It's strong. Directly below us. They descended into the deepest part of the trench. The water pressure here was immense, enough to crush a lesser vessel. But Ash's Pokémon were strong, and Lapras created a bubble of psychic energy to shield him from the worst of it. On the seabed, half buried in the silt, was the source. It was a grotesque, mechanical device, a lattice of black, crystalline metal that pulsed with a malevolent red light. It looked like a monstrous metal sea urchin, with dozens of sharp spines burrowing into the seafloor. In the center, a dark, obsidian-like core throbbed in time with the energy pulses, leaching a constant stream of red sludge into the water. It was the heart of the Crimson Blight. And the design of the metal, it was eerily similar to the obsidian emblem Ash had found in Stoonside. Nessa, I found it, he said, his voice grim. It's a machine. It's poisoning the water and, it looks like it's drawing energy from the seabed. Siphoning it. My sensors are going haywire, Nessa confirmed. That thing is pulling Galar particles directly from the power spot that runs under the trench. It's converting the raw energy into, that poison. Ash, you have to destroy it. As he approached, the device seemed to sense him. Several of its spines detached and shot towards him like torpedoes. Kingler, harden. Kingler moved in front of Ash, its shell glowing as it became as hard as diamond. The spines shattered against it in a shower of black shards. It has defenses, Ash reported. I'm going to need to get in close to take out the core. Wait, Nessa's voice was urgent. The energy is cycling. I'm seeing a power fluctuation. The core is shielded, but the energy conduit feeding it is exposed in a repeating pattern. The main ventral conduit, on its underside. It's only exposed for 3 seconds every 20. Any other time, the shield will just reflect the attack, maybe even amplify it and send it back at you. Ash looked at the monstrous device. Getting to its underside while it was actively defending itself was going to be next to impossible. 3 seconds isn't a lot of time. It's all you're going to get, she replied. I'll time it from here. When I give the word, you have to strike. This was it. The fusion of their abilities. Her mind, his action. All right team, here's the plan, Ash said, his voice a low, urgent command to his Pokémon. Lapras, use mist to obscure us. Kingler, you're going to draw its fire. I need you to use Bubble Beam, continuously, on its upper casing. Make it think the attack is coming from above. Dracovish, you and I are going in low and fast. We get one shot at this. The Pokémon moved in perfect concert. Lapras exhaled a thick, swirling fog that further clouded the already murky water. Kingler unleashed a furious barrage of bubbles, peppering the top of the device. Just as Ash predicted, the defensive spines oriented upwards, firing into the mist at the perceived threat. It's working, Ash muttered. Nessa, get ready to call it. He and Dracovish shot forward under the cover of the chaos, skimming the seafloor. They raced towards the underside of the pulsating machine. The cycle is starting. 10 seconds. Nessa's countdown began. Ash could see the conduit now, a thick cable of the same black metal, protected by an armored sheath. 5, 4, he and Dracovish braced themselves. 3, 2, 1. Now. As she spoke, the armored sheath retracted, exposing the glowing red conduit. Drakovish's jaws, already radiating an intense energy, ignited with the green and yellow power of its signature move. Fishious Rend. Full power. Ash roared through the calm Dracovish struck. Its jaws, capable of shattering boulders, clamped down on the exposed conduit. For a terrifying second, nothing happened. Then, with a deafening crunch that vibrated through the entire trench, the conduit shattered. The device let out a high-pitched scream of dying machinery. Red energy arced wildly from the wound, and the central core flickered and went dark. The constant stream of crimson poison sputtered and stopped. A massive feedback loop erupted from the device, a wave of pure, concussive force. Everyone, brace! Ash yelled, holding on to Lapras as the shockwave hit them, sending them tumbling through the water. On the surface, alarms blared on the tidal grace. The ship rocked as the underwater explosion reached it. Ash! Ash, respond! What's your status? Nessa yelled into her headset, her knuckles white as she gripped the console. For a heart-stopping moment, there was only static. Then, his voice, strained but clear, came through. We're okay. The device is disabled. The core is dead. A collective sigh of relief swept through the bridge. Nessa closed her eyes, her shoulders slumping as days of tension finally drained away. As if a switch had been flipped, the blight began to dissipate. The thick, red particles lost their cohesion and started to dissolve into harmless sediment. The water, slowly but surely, began to clear. The sun was setting as the tidal grace docked, casting a brilliant orange and gold light across a harbor that was beginning to look like itself again. The water was still murky, but it was no longer the angry, viscous red. Ash, now back in his dry clothes, stood with Nessa on the deck, watching the colors play on the surface. They were both exhausted, drained by the physical and mental toll of the day, but it was the clean, satisfying exhaustion that came after a hard-won victory. My teams are reporting that the blight is receding faster than they thought possible, Nessa said, her voice soft. The ecosystem will take time to recover, but the immediate threat is over. You saved my city, Ash. We saved it, he corrected, looking at her. I would have been swimming in circles without your guidance. You were the one who found the weakness. She gave a small, genuine smile, one that reached her eyes and transformed her entire face. It was a far cry from the cool, professional mask she usually wore. I suppose we make a decent team. She was quiet for a long moment, her gaze on the horizon. When I first heard about the king and the pact, I saw it as a political maneuver. A strategic alliance to consolidate power and stabilize the region's economy. A move on the global chessboard. She turned to face him, her aqua-colored eyes searching his. I was prepared to play my part. To leverage this for Hulbury's benefit, for Galar's. I assessed you as a piece on that board, a powerful one, to be sure, but a symbol. A figurehead sent by Wyndon to be managed. She shook her head, a hint of self-deprecation in her expression. I misjudged you completely. You're not a piece on the board, Ash. You're one of those forces that knocks the whole table over. I've never seen anyone lead like you did today. That wasn't the action of a king. It was the action of a hero. I'm just a trainer, he said simply, though there was a warmth in his chest at her words. I saw people and Pokemon in trouble, and I did what I could to help. That's all it's ever been. It was in that simple, honest statement that Nessa finally understood. His power wasn't in the mark on his hand, or in his formidable Pokemon. It was in his unwavering, uncomplicated clarity of purpose. He didn't get bogged down in politics or ambition. He just saw what was right and did it. And in a world of shifting tides and treacherous currents, that kind of certainty was more valuable than any crown. A comfortable silence fell between them as they watched the last sliver of sun dip below the horizon. The first stars began to appear in the twilight sky. A pact made of ancient law was beginning to feel like something else entirely. It was beginning to feel like a partnership. In a sterile, white laboratory deep beneath the streets of Wyndon, a place that officially did not exist, Lord Valerius watched the final report flicker across a holographic screen. The screen showed a schematic of the Halcyon Trench device, now marked with a large, red failure. One of his shadow disciples, cloaked and masked, stood rigidly at his side. My lord, the asset in Hulbury was lost. The king and the Hulbury gym leader disabled it. Valerius showed no sign of anger or disappointment. He simply steepled his fingers, his cold eyes studying the data stream coming from the device's last moments. He saw the energy readings, the battle tactics, the final, precise strike on the conduit. It was not a failure, Valerius said, his voice calm and contemplative. It was a calculated loss. A probe. He brought up another screen, this one a complex, three-dimensional map of the Galar region, crisscrossed with glowing lines of energy. A bright, pulsing node at Hulbury now flashed with a red, vulnerability identified, tag. The device served its purpose perfectly, he continued, a thin, chilling smile on his lips. It confirmed the location and sensitivity of one of the region's primary energy nexuses. It tested the response time of the local leadership. And most importantly, he zoomed in on the tactical data from the final moments of the fight. He saw Nessa's commands from the tidal grace and Ash's actions in the deep. The puppet and the mermaid have shown us exactly where the region's lifeblood is most vulnerable. Not just in the sea, but in their methods. They are reactive. They solve the problem in front of them. They do not see the larger pattern. He waved a hand, and the screen disappeared. The data is invaluable. Our next move will be far more precise. Let them celebrate their little victory. They are simply teaching me how to defeat them. Chapter 4, The Voice of the Forgotten Spikemouth. Did not have kings. It had a gym leader, who was also the brother of its de facto den mother. It had Team Yell, a legion of loud, fiercely loyal punks who served as its unofficial neighborhood watch, welcoming committee, and security force all rolled into one. And it had Marnie. She was the town's heart, its conscience, and its smoldering, defiant spirit. The idea of kneeling to some outsider in a castle was, to put it mildly, not going over well. The news from Stow-on-Side and Hulbury had trickled into the perpetually shadowed, neon-lit town like a foreign contaminant. Ash Ketchum had bested Bee in her own gauntlet. He had saved Hulbury's entire port. To the rest of Galar, these were the acts of a worthy hero king. To Spikemouth, they were stories from another world, tales of the powerful helping the powerful. Stow-on-Side had its dojos, Hulbury had its global shipping lanes. What did Spikemouth have? It had peeling paint, busted streetlights, and the unwavering conviction that the rest of Galar had forgotten it existed. This conviction was fertile ground, and someone was planting seeds. A man named Kale had appeared in town a week ago. He was charismatic, with a revolutionary's fire in his eyes and a voice that could soothe and ignite in equal measure. He wore the patched-up, DIY aesthetic of Spikemouth like a native, but his words were too polished, his arguments too sharp. He spoke of Galar's neglect, of the riches of Winden built on the backs of towns like theirs. And he spoke of the new king. He comes with his queens of martial might and coastal wealth. Kale declaimed, standing on a makeshift stage of stacked amplifiers in the town square. A crowd had gathered, mostly members of Team Yell and other disaffected locals. He seals a pact with the very powers that have kept us in the shadows. This isn't a union to protect Galar. It's a merger. The elites are consolidating their power, and they call it a monarchy to make it sound romantic. His word struck a chord. The crowd roared its approval. They felt seen, heard, for the first time in a long time. Marnie stood at the edge of the crowd, her morpico perched on her shoulder, its tiny fists clenched. Her brother, Piers, stood beside her, his arms crossed, his lanky frame draped in his usual punk regalia. "This bloke's good," Piers muttered, his voice a low monotone that couldn't quite hide his concern. "He's tellin' them everything they already believe." "He's tellin' them lies mixed with truth," Marnie corrected, her gaze fixed on Kale. "That's the dangerous part." She was torn. Everything Kale said about Spikematha's neglect was true. She'd spent her whole life fighting for her town to get a sliver of the respect and resources that were showered on places like Hammerlock. But she had also been there, in Stow-on-Side. She'd seen Ash bow to a defeated opponent. She'd heard Nessa's report, relayed through Leon, of how he deferred to her expertise. He didn't act like the arrogant toff Kale was painting him as. But how could she explain that to her people? How could she defend a king when she'd spent her life railing against the system he represented? Morpico, sensing her inner conflict, shifted restlessly, its aura crackling as it threatened to flip to its hangry mode. Marnie stroked its head, calming it. "Easy, Pico. Just watchin', dot." Kale's voice rose to a crescendo. "And now, he's coming here. To our home. He wants to claim our spirit for his crown. But the spirit of Spikemath ain't for sale. It ain't for the Takin. We don't need a king from on high to save us. We need to save ourselves. We need a Galar where the forgotten are finally put first." The crowd erupted. Vuvuzelas blared. Team Yell grunts shouted their allegiance to Kale and his message. He was offering them a revolution, and it was a far more tempting promise than a place in a monarchy they didn't trust. Piers nudged her. "The town festival is tomorrow. They say he's comin' for it. What's the plan?" "Little sis." Marnie's jaw tightened. "I don't know. But he's walkin' into a obstagoon pit." The Spikemath Founders Festival was less a formal celebration and more an organized excuse for the entire town to blast music, eat cheap food, and battle. Makeshift stalls sold fried snacks and banned merchandise. Competing sound systems created a chaotic but strangely harmonious symphony of punk, rock, and electronica. It was loud, gritty, and unapologetically Spikemath. When Ash arrived, it was like a record scratch in the middle of a power chord. He came with a minimal security detail, just two of Cadogan's guards who looked even more out of place here than they had in Stow-on-Side. He wore his usual traveler's clothes, not a stitch of royal finery on him. Bee and Nessa were with him, a deliberate show of the united front they were trying to build. Bee looked stoic and unimpressed, her fighter's senses on high alert in the unpredictable environment. Nessa, ever the pragmatist, was taking it all in with a curious, anthropological detachment. The music didn't stop, but a wave of silence followed them as they walked into the main square. The air grew thick with hostility. Team Yell grunts formed a loose, intimidating wall, their arms crossed, their faces painted in sneers. Marnie met them at the entrance to the square, Piers flanking her. "Catch 'em," she said, her tone flat. "Big mistake comin' here." "Marnie," Ash greeted her, his expression calm. He looked past her at the hostile faces. "I was invited." "That was before your fan club showed up," she shot back, nodding towards the stage where Kale was watching them with a triumphant smirk. "This is my town. My people. They don't trust you. And right now, I'm not sure I blame him. Then let me talk to them, Ash said, his request simple and direct. Talk. Marnie scoffed. They don't want to talk. They want to tell you to get lost. Then I'll listen, he replied without missing a beat. Before Marnie could argue, Kale seized the moment. He grabbed a microphone, and his amplified voice boomed across the square, silencing all the music. Look! The king has graced us with his presence. And he's brought his wealthy friends. Come to see how the other half lives, have you? The crowd jeered. Someone threw a crumpled-up can that landed near Ash's feet. One of his guards moved to draw a poke ball, but Ash put a hand on his arm, stopping him. Is this the spirit of Galar you've come to claim? Kale continued, his voice dripping with theatrical scorn. The defiance of the forgotten? Or are you just here for a photo opportunity before you return to your castle? Tell us, your majesty, what do you know of our struggles? All eyes were on Ash. It was a perfectly laid trap. If he gave a royal speech, he'd prove Kale's point. If he got angry, he'd look like a tyrant. His guards tensed, ready for the situation to explode. Bea's hand drifted towards her belt. Nessa subtly scanned for escape routes. Ash did none of those things. He took a step forward, away from his allies, away from his guards, and walked directly towards the jeering crowd. He stopped in front of a particularly loud Team Yell grunt who had been shouting insults. The man, intimidating up close with his painted face and spiked gear, was momentarily stunned into silence by the king's proximity. Ash didn't look angry. He just looked, attentive. You're right, he said, his voice quiet but carrying in the tense silence. I don't know. So tell me. The grunt was flustered. What? Tell me about your struggles, Ash repeated. The power grid on this side of town flickers, doesn't it? I saw it on the way in. How often does that happen? The direct, specific question caught the man off guard. A few times a week. More when it rains. Messes with the amps. Ash nodded, then turned to a woman who ran a food stall. Your fryer, he said, pointing. The heating element is jury-rigged, isn't it? It's not getting up to proper temperature. You're losing money on supplies because things aren't cooking right. The woman stared at him, her mouth agape. How did you? He didn't answer. He just kept walking, deeper into the crowd, his eyes seeing things no politician would ever notice. He wasn't looking at the big picture, he was looking at the small, broken details of their lives. The roof on that building leaks, he said to another person, pointing. You can see the water stains from here. And the public Pokemon Center, it's too small. I bet the wait times are long, and they're always short on specialized medicines. He wasn't lecturing them. He was simply observing, articulating the problems they lived with every single day, problems they thought no one outside of Spikemouth even saw. He spoke their truth for them, without judgment or pity. The mood in the crowd began to shift. The jeers died down, replaced by confused murmurs. The hostility began to curdle into grudging respect. This wasn't a king looking down from on high. This was a trainer, someone used to noticing the details, to seeing the condition of a Pokemon or a piece of gear at a glance. Marnie watched, her heart pounding. He was disarming them, not with power or promises, but with simple, undeniable empathy. He was showing them that he saw them. Kale, realizing he was losing control, tried to reclaim the narrative. Observations. He offers us observations while we live in squalor. We don't need you to point out our problems, King. We need you to fix them. Or better yet, get out of the way and let us fix them ourselves. He had misjudged the shift in the crowd. His aggressive tone now sounded shrill and desperate compared to Ash's quiet competence. At that moment, Morpeko, still on Marnie's shoulder, suddenly shrieked. It leaped into the air, its fur standing on end as it instantly flipped into its hangry mode. Its aura turned a menacing purple, its eyes glowing red. "More Pico!" Marnie cried. "What is it?" The Pokémon ignored her. It shot like a tiny, furious cannonball towards an alleyway near the main stage, its cheeks crackling with dark energy. Ash's head snapped up, his battle instincts taking over. Pikachu. Pikachu was already moving, a yellow blur following Morpeko. A split second later, an explosion rocked the alleyway. A shower of sparks erupted from a power conduit, and the neon lights all over the square flickered and died, plunging the festival into semi-darkness. The music cut out with a screech of feedback. Panic began to ripple through the crowd. "What was that?" someone shouted. From the alleyway, two figures in dark gear emerged, their faces covered. They were carrying tools and looked shocked at having been discovered. They were Kale's men. "It's sabotage," the Team Yell grunt yelled, pointing. They were trying to blow the grid. Kale's face went pale. His plan was exposed. He had arranged for a small, controlled blackout to underscore his point about the town's failing infrastructure, a bit of political theater. But it had gone wrong. Or rather, it had been discovered. "Seize them," he ordered his loyalists, trying to spin the situation. "Agents from Winden, trying to silence us." But it was too late. The illusion was shattered. Ash didn't hesitate. He wasn't a politician, he was a crisis manager. "Marnie," he yelled, his voice cutting through the rising panic. "Your people are scared. Get the lights back on. I'll handle them." He didn't wait for an answer. He trusted her to do her part. He sprinted towards the saboteurs, who were now trying to fight their way out of the crowd. Marnie was frozen for a half-second, stunned by the speed of it all, by the implicit trust in his command. Then her own instincts kicked in. "Piers. Get the backup generator online. Now. Team Yell, with me. Protect our people. Form a perimeter." The town that had been a hostile mob a minute ago was now a coordinated unit, following two different leaders who were, for the first time, working towards the same goal. Ash, with Bee and Nessa now moving to support him, cornered the saboteurs near the stage. "It's over," Ash said, his voice cold. Pikachu stood before him, its cheeks sparking ominously. "Give it up." The saboteurs, desperate, released their Pokémon, a pair of aggressive Toxtricity. Their punk rock appearance was fitting, but their intent was purely malicious. "Toxtricity, overdrive," one of them yelled. The two Pokémon slammed their hands on their chests, unleashing a deafening, discordant wave of sound and electricity aimed not at Ash, but at the panicking crowd. "They're targeting civilians." Bee shouted in disgust. Before the attack could land, a wall of shadowy energy erupted from the ground, absorbing the blast. Marnie's Grimmsnarl had appeared, its powerful body shielding the onlookers. Marnie stood beside it, her face a mask of cold fury. "You don't attack people in my town," she snarled. Now it was a real battle. Ash and Marnie, back to back, fighting not against each other, but for the same cause. "Pikachu, Electroweb." Ash commanded. "Grimmsnarl, Spirit Break." Marnie ordered. Their Pokémon moved as one. Pikachu's electric net tangled one Toxtricity, while Grimmsnarl's powerful Fairy-type attack slammed into the other, neutralizing its Poison-type advantage. It was a swift, brutal, and perfectly executed takedown. The two Toxtricity were down, and their trainers, surrounded by angry Team Yell grunts, quickly surrendered. In the aftermath, as the backup generator coughed to life and the festival lights flickered back on, a new kind of silence fell over the square. The townsfolk looked at the captured saboteurs, then at Kale, who was being held by Piers, his face a mixture of fear and disbelief. And then they looked at Ash and Marnie, standing side by side amidst the debris. Kale's deception was laid bare for all to see. He hadn't been a voice for the forgotten, he had been a user of their pain, willing to endanger them for his own agenda. Ash walked over to Marnie, his expression serious. "You and Grimmsnarl were amazing. Your timing was perfect." Marnie looked away, a faint blush on her cheeks that was invisible in the neon glow. "Course it was. It's my town." She looked down at the ground, then back at him, her usual defiant glare softened by a new, complicated emotion. You listened. You didn't just come here to make a speech. You actually saw us." "I told you I would," he said simply. In that moment, she understood. He wasn't a king who wanted to rule them. He was a partner who wanted to protect them. His heart, she realized with a jolt, beat with the same fierce, protective rhythm as her own. It beat for the underdog, for the forgotten, for the people in the shadows. She took a deep, shaky breath, making a decision. In front of her brother, her team, and her entire town, she did something that would have been unthinkable an hour ago. She reached out and took his hand. His hand was warm, calloused from years of training and travel. The faint, silvery mark of the king pulsed with a gentle light against her skin. "All right," she said, her voice quiet but firm, for him alone to hear. "If you're fightin' for places like this, then I'll fight with you." Then, louder, for everyone to hear, she raised their joined hands. "The spirit of Spikemouth stands with the king." A hesitant cheer went up from the crowd, quickly swelling into a genuine roar of approval. They weren't cheering for a king. They were cheering for their Marnie, and for the boy who had earned her trust. From his hidden sanctuary, Lord Valerius watched the scene play out on his scrying pool. The image wavered and died as the drone he had watching the festival was discovered and destroyed by a stray rock from an angry Team Yell member. He showed no frustration. He simply leaned back in his ornate chair, a thoughtful expression on his face. Kale had been an expendable, low-level asset, a useful firebrand to test the waters. His failure was, in its own way, a success. "Interesting," Valerius murmured to the empty room. "He connects with them. He doesn't command, he empathizes. A weakness we can exploit." He looked at the map of Galar, which now had a third node, Spikemouth, glowing with data. Stow-on-Side had tested Ash's body. Hulbury, his mind. Spikemouth had tested his heart. And in passing each test, he had revealed his greatest strengths to his unseen enemy. "Let her give him their spirit," Valerius said, a cold smile touching his lips. He was playing a longer game, a grander strategy. "Let them believe their little bonds of friendship and love will save them. When the true darkest day arrives, when the sky breaks and hope is extinguished, that spirit will be the first thing to shatter. And their despair will be the final key we need. Their broken spirit will not just be silenced, it will be ours to reforge in the image of the endless night." He had identified all the pillars. Strength. Lifeblood. Spirit. And now, they were all conveniently gathered around his primary target. The board was set. The next move would be his. Chapter 5, The Council of Winden. The Great Hall of Winden Castle was a masterwork of propaganda, built to awe and intimidate. Sunlight, filtered through colossal stained-glass windows depicting Galar's ancient heroes vanquishing dark forces, fell in reverent shafts upon the polished marble floor. The vaulted ceiling soared into shadow, supported by pillars carved into the likenesses of legendary Pokémon. At the far end, raised on a multi-tiered dais, sat the Galar League Council, a collection of gym leaders, ancient lords in ermine-trimmed robes, and powerful corporate figures who collectively held the region's fate in their hands. It was a room that reeked of old money, old power, and an unshakable belief in its own importance. Today, however, that belief was being shaken. Ash stood before them, not at the foot of the dais like a supplicant, but on the main floor, creating a deliberate space between himself and the established hierarchy. Nessa, and Marnie stood with him, a silent, formidable line. Their presence alone was a statement. The unyielding fighter, the elegant tycoon, and the defiant punk idol, three disparate corners of Galar's society, now united. It was a sight that made many of the council members deeply uncomfortable. The reason for this emergency council session stood opposite them. Lord Valerius. He was the very picture of aristocratic grace, dressed in the dark, immaculate finery of a forgotten noble house. His silver-gray eyes swept across the assembly with a look of cool, intellectual confidence. He had not seized the floor, he had been granted it, having formally requested an audience to address a matter of grave regional importance. He had come not as a shadowy conspirator, but as a concerned patriot, and his performance was chillingly effective. Esteemed leaders of Galar, he began, his voice a rich, cultured baritone that carried to every corner of the hall without the need for amplification. I come before you not as an alarmist, but as a student of our region's history. A history that, I fear, we are doomed to repeat if we do not have the courage to examine its truths. He gestured to a series of large, elegantly illustrated charts that his retainers had erected. They depicted timelines, bloodlines, and energy readings. It was a dazzling, overwhelming display of information. For a millennium, Valerius continued, his tone reasonable and scholarly, Galar has been defined by the legend of the twin heroes and their battle against the darkest day. We have been taught to see this event as a pure victory of light over dark. But I ask you to consider, was it? A murmur went through the council. Leon, sitting at the right hand of Chairman Cadogan, leaned forward, his expression wary. Sonia, present as a historical consultant, scribbled furiously in a notebook, her brow furrowed. The texts described the darkest day as a moment of limitless power descending upon Galar, Valerius explained, pointing to a diagram of Eternatus. He did not portray it as a monster, but as a creature of pure, chaotic energy. A moment of potential ascension. An opportunity for Galar to evolve, to shed the shackles of its mundane limitations. But the twin heroes, Zachian and Zamazenta, in their fear, did not tame this power. They suppressed it. They imprisoned our region's true potential and installed a line of kings whose sole purpose was to act as wardens, to maintain the status quo. He was reframing their entire mythology. Not as a heroic saga, but as an act of cowardice. The line of kings failed, he stated, his voice ringing with conviction. Their power faded. Galar stagnated. And now, history repeats. A new king has been chosen by these same timid spirits. An outsider, no less. He turned his gaze on Ash, a look of pity, not malice, in his eyes. A well-meaning but ultimately unqualified young man, now burdened with a title he cannot possibly comprehend. Ash met his gaze, his expression unreadable. And what is the proof of this new king's nascent reign? Valerius asked, turning back to the council. Chaos. An assassination attempt on the pillar of strength in her own city, a sign of unprecedented instability. BEA's jaw tightened. A near-catastrophic poisoning of our most vital economic artery in Holbury. Nessa's cool facade remained, but her eyes were like ice chips. And an act of blatant, foreign-incited sabotage in the heart of Spikemouth. Marnie's hands clenched into fists. He was twisting their victories, reframing them as failures under Ash's watch. He was using the very crises Ash had solved as evidence of his incompetence. It was brilliant, insidious, and it was working. Several of the older, more conservative lords were nodding in agreement. This is not leadership, Valerius declared. It is a series of disasters, barely averted. This path, the path of the false heroes, leads only to weakness and ruin. But there is another way. He paused for dramatic effect, letting his words hang in the silent hall. Our history speaks of another heritage. A forgotten path. Not one of suppression, but of integration. Of embracing the boundless power of the Galar particles, the energy that flows from the darkest day itself. I propose we set aside these childish fairy tales of a chosen king and forge a new future. A Galar that does not fear its own power, but masters it. A Galar that can truly ascend. He didn't explicitly mention his plan to merge with Eternatus, but the implication was clear, veiled in the language of progress and strength. He was offering them godhood, a Galar that could dictate its own terms to the world. And to the power-hungry men and women on the council, it was a deeply seductive offer. Chairman Cadogan, a man who navigated politics like a ship in a storm, finally spoke. Lord Valerius, you present a bold reinterpretation of our history. But the fact remains, the mark of the king is real. Ash Ketchum bears it. A mark can be a brand or a warning just as easily as it can be a crown, Valerius countered smoothly. It is a symbol, and its meaning is what we choose to give it. I ask the council to choose strength. Choose ambition. Choose a future worthy of Galar. He had finished. The hall was thick with tension, divided between the ancient, comfortable legend and the terrifying, glorious promise Valerius offered. All eyes turned to Ash. This was his moment. His chance to give a kingly rebuttal, to dismantle Valerius's arguments point by point. The council waited for a speech, a defense of his title. Ash took a breath. He looked not at the council, not at Leon or the chairman, but at B, Nessa, and Marnie. He gave them a small, almost imperceptible nod. Then he spoke, his voice clear and steady, devoid of the rhetorical flourish Valerius had employed. Lord Valerius is a good speaker, he began, and the simplicity of the statement was disarming. He talks about history. About power. About ascension. He paused, then looked directly at the assembled lords and ladies. I don't know much about ascension. But I know what it looks like when a town is afraid. I know what it feels like when a Pokemon is in pain. And I know what happens when someone gets so obsessed with power that they forget about the people they're supposed to be protecting. His gaze flickered to Valerius. You talk about Galar's strength. But you don't see it. You think it's some energy source to be controlled. You're wrong. He turned to B. Galar's strength is in the discipline of a warrior who dedicates her life to her art. It's in the honor of a fighter who respects her opponent, in victory or defeat. He then turned to Nessa. Galar's strength is in the resilience of a leader who stares down economic ruin and doesn't blink. It's in the sharp mind that can navigate a crisis and guide her people out of the dark. Finally, he turned to Marnie. And Galar's strength is in the fierce, stubborn heart of someone who will stand up for the forgotten, who will fight for her home, no matter who tells her she can't win. It's in the spirit of a town that refuses to be broken. He stepped back, rejoining their line. That's the Galar I'm fighting for. Not some idea in a history book. The real Galar. The people. If you think Valerius's vision of power is better than that, then he's welcome to it. He had not refuted a single one of Valerius's points. He had simply offered a different truth. A simpler, more human one. The hall was silent. Ash's speech hadn't been for the council. It had been for the three women standing with him. Valerius scoffed, a look of condescending pity on his face. An emotional, if naive, sentiment. But feelings do not run a region. Power does. And this union, he gestured dismissively at the four of them, is a romantic fantasy, not a stable foundation for rule. Is it? A new voice cut through the hall. It was B. She stepped forward, her presence as solid and undeniable as the castle walls. Lord Valerius speaks of the incident in my city as a failure of the king, she said, her voice ringing with cold authority. He is mistaken. The assassins came because they feared him. They failed because we stood together. I have tested Ash Ketchum's body and his spirit. He has more honor and fortitude than any man in this room. The pillar of strength recognizes its king. I stand with him. She stepped back in line. Before the council could process this, Nessa stepped forward, her elegance a sharp contrast to BEA's raw power. Lord Valerius speaks of Holbury as a disaster, Nessa said, her voice smooth and sharp as sea glass. He neglects to mention that the blight was an artificial plague, a deliberate attack on our economy. An attack that was thwarted not by committees or debate, but by decisive action and brilliant leadership. Ash Ketchum brought clarity when there was chaos and partnership when there was despair. His vision extends beyond a balance sheet to the lives that power our economy. The pillar of lifeblood recognizes its king. I stand with him. She, too, stepped back. Then it was Marnie's turn. She looked deeply uncomfortable being the center of attention in such a grand hall, but her voice, when she spoke, was laced with steel. This lordling talks about Spikemuth, she said, her accent a defiant note in the symphony of posh dialects. He talks about our struggles. But he sent his man, Kale, to use our pain. To turn us against each other. To hurt us for his own gain. Ash, he came and he listened. He fought for us, not for a title, but because it was the right thing to do. He showed my town more respect in one afternoon than Wyndon has shown it in 100 years. The pillar of spirit recognizes its king. I stand with him. She fell back in line, and the four of them stood there, a united, unbreakable wall. Their 3 testimonies, delivered from the heart and forged in crisis, were 1,000 times more powerful than Valerius's slick presentation. They were a living, breathing refutation of his entire argument. They weren't a fantasy. They were a fact. The tide in the room had turned completely. The wavering lords now looked at Valerius with suspicion. His carefully constructed narrative had been dismantled, not by Ash, but by the very pillars he had tried to use as evidence. Ash looked at the 3 women who had just defended him, his heart swelling with a profound gratitude that went far beyond politics. He saw the trust in their eyes, the shared conviction. This was no longer about a law or a pact. This was about them. He stepped forward one last time, his gaze sweeping over the council, but his words directed at the 3 beside him. The ancient law says that for the king to be whole, he must unite the pillars through a sacred pact. A marriage. He took a breath, the weight of the moment settling on him. I thought it was a duty. A requirement. I was wrong. He looked at B. B, you taught me that strength isn't just about winning, but about honor and protecting others. You are Galar's strength. He looked at Nessa. Nessa, you taught me that leadership isn't just about power, but about clarity, vision, and lifting people up. You are Galar's lifeblood. He looked at Marnie. And Marnie, you taught me that a kingdom is worthless if it forgets a single one of its people. Your heart is the spirit of Galar. His voice was thick with emotion, but his eyes were clear. This isn't about a law anymore. I'm not asking for your allegiance because a book tells me to. I'm asking because I can't imagine leading this region without you. In the great, silent hall of Wyndon Castle, in front of the entire ruling council, Ash Ketchum got down on one knee. He wasn't proposing to fulfill a prophecy. He was proposing because it was what his heart told him to do. B. Nessa. Marnie. Will you be my partners? Will you rule Galar with me, as my queens? The silence was absolute. No one breathed. This was no longer a political debate. It was a pivotal moment in Galar's history. B, the stoic warrior, was the first to react. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. I will, she said, her voice firm. Nessa's cool facade melted away, replaced by a radiant, genuine smile. I will, she said, her voice like a melody. Marnie looked shocked, flustered, and deeply moved. She looked at Ash, kneeling on the floor, and then at her new, unlikely allies. A tear escaped the corner of her eye, which she angrily wiped away. Yeah, she choked out. All right. I will. A roar went up from the gallery. Leon was on his feet, applauding, a massive grin on his face. The council, seeing the undeniable power of the moment, rose as well, their applause thundering through the hall. Valerius stood alone, his charts and graphs forgotten. His face was a placid mask, but his eyes were burning with a cold fire. He had been utterly, humiliatingly defeated in the political arena. His careful arguments, his historical manipulations, all swept away by a simple, heartfelt declaration. But as he watched the four of them, now standing together, their hands clasped, a triumphant king and his three queens-to-be, his mask-like face broke into a chilling, private smile. He hadn't lost. He had just confirmed his target. They had publicly, formally, irrevocably bound themselves together. He now knew exactly where the heart of Galar's power resided. And he knew that to destroy Galar, all he had to do was destroy the four of them. The political game was over. The real war was about to begin. Chapter 6, The Shadow on the Hammer. The Hammerlock Energy Plant was Galar's iron heart, a sprawling monument to industrial might. Its colossal central tower, shaped like a dragon's maw, loomed over the city, a constant reminder of the power that slept fitfully beneath it. This was where Chairman Rose had nearly brought about the second darkest day, the epicenter of the Eternatus crisis. Now, under heavy guard and scientific supervision, it was a place of careful study, a wound that Galar was trying to understand rather than simply forget. The alarms began as a low, insistent hum, a vibration felt deep in the plant's foundations. Then they escalated to a piercing, panicked shriek that echoed across the city, painting the sky in strobing red emergency lights. This was not a drill. This was a full-scale assault. Lord Valerius's shadow disciples descended upon the plant not with stealth, but with overwhelming force. They emerged from the city's shadows, a coordinated, multi-pronged attack that hit the facility's key security points simultaneously. They were an army, clad in black tactical gear, their faces hidden behind obsidian masks that mirrored the chaotic star of their emblem. Their Pokémon were not the common grunts of a lesser evil team, they were powerful, highly trained, and ruthless. A wave of Drapion and Bisharp overwhelmed the outer perimeter while elite squads on Corviknight and Noivern descended on the rooftops, disabling communications and anti-air defenses. The attack was a masterpiece of military precision. They weren't trying to cause random destruction, their objective was singular and terrifyingly clear. They were fighting their way down, level by level, towards the deepest part of the reactor core where the residual energy of Eternatus still lingered, a faint but potent echo of its cataclysmic power. Raihan, Hammerlock's gym leader, was the first on the scene, his Duraludin already by his side. Form a defensive line at the sublevel entrance, he roared into his Rotom phone, the winds of a dozen attacking Pokémon whipping his hoodie. Do not let them reach the core. But they were outnumbered and outmaneuvered. The disciples fought with a chilling, fanatic zeal, their Pokémon striking to disable, not to defeat. They were a black tide, flowing inexorably towards their goal. In Winden, the news hit the castle's war room like a physical blow. A massive holographic map of Hammerlock glowed red, dozens of emergency alerts blinking like frantic heartbeats. Ash, Bee, Nessa, and Marnie stood around the table, their wedding ceremony interrupted before it could even begin. They were still in the formal attire they'd chosen, Ash in a tailored dark blue tunic, Bee in a sharp white suit, Nessa in a flowing sea green gown, and Marnie in a surprisingly elegant black dress that still managed to look punk rock. The celebratory mood had evaporated, replaced by the cold, hard reality of war. Raihan's forces are being pushed back, Leon said, his voice grim as he relayed field reports. The disciples are using tactics we've never seen before. They're coordinated, disciplined. This isn't a terrorist attack, Ash. This is an invasion. Valerius has accelerated his timeline, Ash said, his eyes fixed on the map, his mind already processing the tactical situation. He lost the political game, so he's moving all his pieces onto the board at once. He wants the core energy. What's the objective? Bee asked, her voice sharp. What can he do with residual energy? Sonia, her face pale, pointed to a schematic of the power plant. The core acts as a containment vessel. If he can absorb that residual energy into a focusing device, he could theoretically use it as a key. A way to call to the slumbering Eternatus, to amplify its power and guide its re-emergence. He's not just trying to steal energy, he's trying to awaken a god. The stakes were clear. This was it. The move Valerius had been building towards. We can't let him succeed, Ash said, his voice ringing with absolute finality. He looked at the three women beside him. The festive clothes felt like a mockery now, a reminder of a piece that had been stolen. There was no fear in their eyes, only a shared, burning resolve. Their pact, their proposal, it had all been leading to this moment. Leon, you and the other gym leaders coordinate the city's evacuation and defense, Ash commanded, his authority natural and unquestioned. Keep the civilians safe. Contain the battle within the plant's perimeter. He turned to his partners. The three of us, we're going in. We cut the head off the snake. We stop Valerius. Marnie corrected him, a fierce grin on her face. The four of us. The flight to Hammerlock on their commandeered Corvinite taxis was a tense, silent affair. Below them, Galar was a patchwork of lights, oblivious to the battle raging for its soul. They landed hard on a cleared rooftop several blocks from the energy plant, the sounds of battle, explosions, the roars of Pokémon, the shriek of metal, already a deafening symphony. The scene at the plant was organized chaos. Raihan and his trainers were holding a desperate line at the main entrance, a fiery, dragon-fueled defense against a seemingly endless wave of shadow disciples. Ash, Bee, Nessa, and Marnie didn't pause. They ran, a four-person storm moving with unnatural speed and purpose. Raihan. Ash yelled as they reached the defensive line. Raihan turned, his face smudged with soot, a wild grin of relief spreading across it. About time you showed up to the party. They're trying to brute force their way to the main reactor lift. We'll take the point, Bee declared, already pulling a pokeball from her belt. Clear a path for us. With pleasure. Raihan roared. Duraludin, steel beam. A colossal beam of pure, molten steel energy blasted from Duraludin's mouth, tearing a temporary hole in the disciples' offensive line. It was the opening they needed. Go. Ash commanded. They charged into the breach. It was the first time the four of them had fought as a single unit, and the effect was devastating. They were not four individuals, they were a perfectly balanced weapon. B was the vanguard. Macamp, Halucha, lead the charge, she yelled. Her two fighting-type powerhouses became a whirlwind of fists and feet, smashing through the enemy lines with disciplined, overwhelming force. They didn't just defeat opponents, they created space, a shield of pure martial might for the others to operate behind. Nessa was the controller. Dreadnought, use Rock Tomb to block their retreat. Toxapex, baneful bunker, she ordered. Her Pokémon manipulated the battlefield itself. Walls of rock erupted from the ground, funneling enemies into kill zones. A venomous, spiky shield appeared, poisoning any Pokémon foolish enough to make a physical attack. She wasn't just fighting, she was shaping the terrain to their advantage, turning the industrial corridors of the plant into a series of inescapable traps. Marnie was the chaos agent. Grim snarl, spirit break on that Bisharp. Morpeko, get in there, Aura wheel, she shouted, her eyes gleaming with battle lust. Her dark and fairy types were masters of disruption. Grimmsnarl's powerful blows shattered the enemy's attack stats, while Morpeko, in its hangry mode, was a tiny, untouchable cannonball of dark energy, zipping between enemy legs, causing confusion and panic, its attacks raising its own speed until it was little more than a blur. And at the heart of it all was Ash, the core and the commander. He and Pikachu were a storm of electric power, moving where the fighting was thickest. Pikachu, use Electroweb to slow them down. Jengar, pop up behind them, Shadow Ball. His commands were clipped, precise, and his Pokémon obeyed instantly, their synergy with each other and with the other teams creating a beautiful, deadly dance. He wasn't just directing his team, he was directing the entire flow of the battle, seeing openings and weaknesses before they even appeared. They punched through the outer defenses and into the plant itself, a whirlwind of fire, water, shadow, and steel. They moved through the corridors like ghosts, a unified force that the disciples, for all their training, could not counter. The main lift is this way. Nessa shouted, pointing down a long service corridor that was swarming with disciples and their Pokémon. No time to fight through them, Ash said, his eyes scanning the environment. He pointed up. The vents. We go over them. Lucario, I need you. Ash called out. Marnie, Grimmsnarl. Lucario appeared, its red eyes glowing. Grimmsnarl flexed its powerful arms. Lucario, give me a boost. Grimmsnarl, catch. In a move of insane acrobatic skill, Lucario launched Ash into the air. He soared over the heads of the stunned disciples below. Halfway across the corridor, Grimmsnarl's long, hair-like appendages shot out, catching him and swinging him like a grappling hook to the far end of the hull. He landed rolling and came up next to the lift controls. Bee, Nessa, and Marnie followed, using their own Pokémon in a similar, breathtaking display of traversal, vaulting and swinging over the enemy forces. They landed beside him as he slammed the button for the lift. The doors groaned open. They'll be right behind us, Bee stated, taking a defensive stance at the door. They won't get the chance, Nessa said, a cold smile on her face. Dreadnought, water gun. Flood the lift shaft entrance. A massive jet of water blasted from Dreadnought's mouth, aimed not at the enemy, but at the ceiling above the corridor entrance. The already damaged structure gave way, and tons of concrete and steel collapsed, completely sealing the hallway. It was a temporary solution, but it had bought them time. The lift descended, plunging them into the depths of the plant. The air grew colder, thick with the taste of ozone and the low thrum of contained power. Valerius will be at the core, Ash said, his voice low. He'll be protected by his best. His lieutenants. Then we'll just have to be better, Bee said, her knuckles cracking as she clenched her fists. The lift doors opened onto a cavernous chamber. This was the heart of the facility. In the center, suspended in a web of magnetic containment fields, was the reactor core. It pulsed with a faint but undeniable purple light, the ghost of Eternatus's power. And standing before it, his back to them, was Lord Valerius. He held a grotesque artifact in his hands, a black, metallic sphere covered in chaotic spikes, with a hollow center. The heart of the abyss. It was already beginning to glow as it siphoned the ambient energy. Blocking their path to him were three figures. His elite guard. The first was a towering man built like a girder, his face a mask of brutal scars. The second was a woman, lithe and fast, who moved like a weevil, her eyes glittering with cruel intelligence. The third was Kale, the firebrand from Spikemouth, his face now twisted with pure, fanatical devotion. So, the king and his consorts have arrived, the brutish lieutenant rumbled. You are too late. The master is completing the ritual. Valerius did not turn. Keep them occupied, he commanded, his voice echoing in the chamber. The heart is almost sated. The three lieutenants stepped forward, releasing their Pokémon. A colossal Rhyperior, a swift and deadly Dragapult, and a supercharged, amped-up Toxtricity. This was it. The final choke point. Ash, Bee, Nessa, and Marnie exchanged a look. No words were needed. Bee stepped forward, her eyes locked on the brutish giant and his Rhyperior. This one is mine, she declared, her voice a low growl. The rest of you, get to Valerius. We fight together, Ash started to say. No, Bee cut him off, her gaze unyielding. This is strategy. You are faster. You are the objective. I am the shield. Go. That is an order from your queen. Ash hesitated for only a second, then nodded, trusting her judgment completely. Nessa, Marnie, with me, he yelled. The three of them broke left, trying to circle around the lieutenants. "Oh no you don't," the lithe woman hissed, her dragapult firing off a volley of dragon darts that cut them off. "You'll have to get through me first." Nessa met her gaze, her expression cool and calculating. "My specialty is dealing with fast, slippery things. I will handle her. Go." That left Kale and his Toxtricity, who now stood directly between Ash, Marnie, and their target. "You." Kale snarled, his eyes burning with hatred for Marnie. "You chose him over your own people. You betrayed the revolution." Marnie laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You betrayed Spike Mouth when you put its people in danger. This one's personal, Ash. I've got him. Get to Valerius. End this." 3 separate duels erupted in the massive chamber, a chaotic ballet of power and purpose. B versus the giant was a clash of titans. Hermakamp met his Rhyperior in a brutal contest of raw strength, their blows shaking the very foundations of the room. It was power against power, discipline against brute force. Nessa versus the assassin was a battle of wits and speed. Her nimble Barraskewda and defensive Toxapex worked in tandem to trap and corner the phantom-like Dragapult, a high-speed chess match where one wrong move would be fatal. Marnie versus Kale was a grudge match, fueled by fury. Her Grimmsnarl took on his Toxtricity, a whirlwind of dark and fairy energy against the raw, amplified power of punk rock. And Ash ran. He vaulted over a stray explosion, dodged a blast of psychic energy, and sprinted for the core. Valerius was still there, his back to the chaos, the artifact in his hand now glowing with a blinding purple light. "It's over, Valerius." Ash shouted, sliding to a halt behind him. Pikachu leaped from his shoulder, cheeks sparking, ready for the final fight. Valerius finally turned. His face was ecstatic, his eyes wide with triumphant madness. The artifact was pulsing in time with his own heartbeat. "Over," he laughed, a wild, unhinged sound. "My dear, foolish king. It has just begun." He held up the heart of the abyss. It had absorbed all the residual energy from the core. The faint purple glow of the reactor faded to nothing. "Thank you for keeping my guards busy," Valerius said with a mock bow. "I couldn't have asked for a better distraction." With that, he tapped a button on his wrist. A section of the floor behind him slid open, revealing a hidden escape tunnel. "No!" Ash yelled, lunging forward. But Valerius was too fast. He held up a hand, and a powerful, unseen force, a psychic barrier from a hidden Pokémon, slammed into Ash, knocking him back. Valerius gave him one last, triumphant smile. "The next time we meet, Ash Ketchum, I will be a god. And you will be the first to kneel." He leaped into the tunnel, and the floor sealed shut behind him, leaving Ash alone in the now silent chamber. He had failed. Valerius had escaped. He had the energy. A victorious roar from across the room signaled the end of BEA's fight. A triumphant cry from Nessa and a furious shout from Marnie followed moments later. They had won their battles. But they had lost the war. They ran to his side, seeing the sealed tunnel and the dead reactor core. "He got away?" Bea asked, her voice tight with frustration. Ash slammed his fist onto the metal floor. "He has the energy. He played us. He used his own lieutenants as sacrificial pawns. The plant was secure. The remaining disciples had surrendered or fled the moment Valerius escaped. But a heavy gloom hung over the victors. They stood in the silent core chamber, the weight of their failure pressing down on them. "It's not over," Nessa said, her voice firm, trying to rally them. "He has the energy, but he hasn't used it yet. We can still track him." "Where would he go?" Marnie asked, looking at Ash. "Where can he use that thing?" Sonia's voice crackled over Ash's comms, tinny and filled with dread. "Ash. Ash, I know where he's going. I've been cross-referencing Valerius's family history with texts about the Darkest Day. His ancestors weren't just worshippers of Eternatus, they were its keepers. They had a sacred site, a place where the barrier between our world and the energy dimension Eternatus inhabits is thinnest. A place that can act as a natural amplifier for a ritual. A new location blinked onto the holographic map on Ash's Rotom phone. A remote, frozen island at the very north of Galar. The crown tundra, Ash breathed, a cold dread washing over him. The Dyna tree. The legendary tree, said to be the origin point of all Dynamax energy in Galar. It was the most powerful power spot on the planet. If he uses the heart of the abyss there, Sonia's voice was trembling, he won't just awaken Eternatus. He'll create a permanent, gaping wound in reality. A new, eternal darkest day. The scope of Valerius's plan was finally clear. It wasn't just about power. It was about apocalypse. Ash looked at the determined, exhausted faces of his partners. They had fought, they had bled, and they had stood together. They had lost the battle, but their resolve was unbroken. Then that's where we're going, Ash said, his voice quiet but filled with a cold, hard certainty. The fight isn't over. It's just moved to the end of the world. Chapter 7, The calm before the endless night. The sky over Galar was bruised. A sickly, perpetual twilight bled from the north, staining the clouds in shades of violet and magenta. It was the color of a fresh wound, a visible symptom of the poison Valerius had injected into the world's ley lines. From Hammerlock, you could feel it as a low, dissonant hum that vibrated in your teeth. In Winden, it manifested as a chilling, unnatural cold that had nothing to do with the weather. Fear, a quiet and creeping thing, was beginning to settle over the region like a shroud. Winden Castle, once a symbol of impenetrable strength, now felt like a bastion under siege. The war room had become the nerve center for a world holding its breath. Maps of the crown tundra covered every surface, dotted with potential routes, energy readings, and troop positions. Leon, Raihan, and the other gym leaders were in constant motion, coordinating a massive, region-wide defensive strategy, preparing for the cataclysm they all knew was coming. But in the eye of this hurricane, a strange and heavy calm had fallen. Ash, Bee, Nessa, and Marnie were quartered in the royal suites, a wing of the castle that hadn't been used in centuries. They were waiting for the transport that would take them to the crown tundra, to the final confrontation. It was a handful of hours, a brief pocket of time suspended between a battle lost and a war that would decide the fate of everything. The weight was heaviest on Ash. He stood on a stone balcony overlooking the city, his hands gripping the cold, carved stone of the balustrade. He wore a simple black training shirt and pants, having shed the formal tunic hours ago. The silvery mark on his hand seemed to pulse with a faint, anxious light, mirroring the sick sky. He had faced gods, stared down reality-bending cataclysms, and walked through the ruins of broken timelines. But this felt different. This was his responsibility. The mark had chosen him, the law had bound him, and the people, Bee, Nessa, Marnie, had placed their faith in him. He had led them into a trap. Valerius had been one step ahead, and now held the key to a world-ending weapon. Ash replayed the battle at the energy plant over and over in his mind, searching for the mistake, the moment he could have done something different. The weight of that failure was a physical thing, a cold stone in his gut. What if he wasn't good enough? What if his best wasn't enough to stop what was coming? For the first time in a long time, the unshakable confidence that had carried him across the world felt fragile, thin as glass. He felt the pressure of millions of lives, and more terrifyingly, the lives of the three women who had tied their fates to his. He didn't hear her approach. He just felt a sudden, steady presence at his side. Bee stood there, not in a GI or a suit, but in simple gray sweats, her hair down, falling over her shoulders. She didn't speak. She just stood beside him, her gaze also on the bruised sky. The silence stretched, comfortable and solid. Finally, she spoke, her voice low. "You are blaming yourself." It wasn't a question. Ash didn't deny it. "I should have seen it. He was too public, too theatrical at the council. It was all misdirection. I walked us right into his plan. Bee turned, her gray eyes serious. The plan was to separate us. To use his lieutenants to pin us down while he achieved his objective. It was a sound strategy. And it worked, Ash said, his voice laced with frustration. It failed, Bee countered, her tone sharp. His strategy relied on the assumption that we would fight as individuals. That I would be consumed by my duel, that Nessa would be lost in her own tactical battle, that Marnie would be blinded by her anger. He thought he could isolate us. He was wrong. I defeated my opponent, but I was always aware of where you were. I felt Nessa's Pokémon manipulating the terrain. I heard Marnie's grim snarl protecting the flank. We fought our own battles, but we never stopped fighting as a unit. He didn't beat us, Ash. He ran. She took a step closer. You feel the weight of this. I can see it. You think you carry it alone. Her expression, usually so stoic, softened. You are the king. But you are not a monarch. You are the center of our formation. You are not meant to bear the full force of the attack. That is my job. Before he could process her words, she moved. It wasn't an attack, but an invitation. She fell into a low, fluid martial arts stance. Spar with me. Ash stared at her. Bee, now is not the time, now is the perfect time, she insisted. Your mind is a storm. You are overthinking. You are fighting a battle in your head that you have already lost 100 times. You need to get out of your head and back into your body. You need to remember that you are a fighter. She beckoned with her fingers. No Pokémon. No powers. Just you and me. Center yourself. He hesitated for a moment, then saw the wisdom in her gaze. It was her way of helping, not with words of comfort, but with action and discipline. He took a breath and fell into his own familiar, street-honed fighting stance. What followed was not a fight for victory. It was a moving meditation. Their movements were a silent conversation on the cold stone of the balcony. Her style was precise, economical, every block and strike a model of technical perfection. His was unorthodox, instinctive, full of surprising angles and explosive bursts of movement learned from 1,000 real-world scrambles. She came at him with a series of quick, probing jabs. He parried them, his forearms meeting hers with sharp slaps that echoed in the quiet air. He countered with a low sweep of his leg, she leaped over it with effortless grace. He pushed, she yielded, redirecting his momentum. She struck, he absorbed, turning her force into his own countermovement. They weren't trying to hurt each other. They were trying to understand each other's rhythm. The frantic energy in Ash's mind began to quiet, forced into silence by the demands of the spar. The world narrowed to his opponent, her movements, her breathing. The weight on his shoulders didn't vanish, but it shifted, becoming something manageable, a source of strength rather than a crushing burden. After several minutes of intense, silent exchange, she broke away. They stood, breathing heavily, a light sweat on their brows. You fight like you train, she observed, a note of approval in her voice. Instinctive. Adaptable. You let your opponent make the first mistake. That is what we will do with Valerius. We will let his arrogance be his undoing. She stepped up to him, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her. She gently took his right hand, her calloused fingers tracing the glowing mark. This does not make you a king, she said softly. Then she placed his hand over his own heart. This does. And it is a heart we all trust. She looked him in the eye, her gaze clear and unwavering. You are not alone in this fight, Ash. My strength is your shield. Now and always. He looked at her, at the fierce loyalty burning in her eyes, and the cold stone of fear in his gut began to melt. He gave her a small, grateful smile. Thank you, Bee. She simply nodded, the unspoken understanding passing between them, more potent than any vow. He found Nessa in the castle's ancient library. It was a vast, circular room, its walls lined with shelves that reached up into the darkness, filled with the collective knowledge of a kingdom. She was standing before a huge, illuminated map of the crown tundra spread across a heavy oak table. She wasn't looking at troop movements or energy readings. She was looking at the topography, the ocean currents, the weather patterns. She had changed into a simple, elegant dark blue dress, and she looked up as he entered, a faint smile on her lips. "I had a feeling you wouldn't be resting." "Neither are you," he said, walking over to the table. "Looking for an advantage?" "Always," she replied, her finger tracing a line along the frozen coastline. "Valerius has the power, but we have the terrain. The crown tundra is notoriously unforgiving. The weather can change in an instant. The sea is treacherous, filled with ice floes. He will go to the Dinah tree, that much is certain. But his approach will be telling." She was in her element, the cool, calculating strategist seeing the bigger picture. But as she spoke, Ash could see the fine lines of tension around her eyes, the slight tremor in her hand as she pointed at the map. She was just as worried as he was, she just hit it better. "Nessa," he said quietly. "Are you okay?" She let out a soft, humorless laugh. "I'm a model and a businesswoman who is about to fly into a supernatural blizzard to fight a man who wants to become a god. Okay, is a relative term." She finally looked away from the map, her professional mask slipping to reveal the deep-seated anxiety beneath. "I keep running the numbers, the probabilities. In any logical strategic analysis, our chances are slim. He has a massive energy advantage, a fanatical army, and he has chosen the battlefield. We are walking into his stronghold." She ran a hand through her hair, a rare sign of distress. "My entire life has been about control. Managing risk. Turning chaos into profit, turning tides in my favor. This is pure chaos. I can't model it. I can't predict it. For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm sailing into a storm without a chart, and it's unnerving." Ash didn't offer false assurances. He didn't tell her they would definitely win. He just stood beside her and looked at the map. "When I was in Alola," he began, his voice calm and steady, "I sailed with some of the people there. They didn't always use charts. They told me that when the storm comes and the sky is dark, you don't look at the map. You look at the waves. You feel the rhythm of the ocean. The tide always has a rhythm, even in a hurricane. It tells you where the safe channels are, where the dangerous currents lie. You just have to be calm enough to listen to it." Nessa turned to look at him, her expression softening. He continued, "You're right. This is chaos. But you're not sailing without a chart, Nessa. You are the chart. B is the hull of the ship, strong and unbreakable. Marnie is the flag, the reason we're sailing in the first place. I might be the one at the wheel, but you're the one who understands the tides. You see the patterns no one else does. You brought clarity to the Crimson Blight. You'll bring clarity to this." He gently took her hand, his thumb stroking the back of it. "We don't need you to control the storm. We just need you to help us navigate it." She stared at their joined hands, then looked up at him, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. She wasn't used to this kind of faith, this kind of emotional clarity. In her world, trust was a commodity, a calculated risk. With him, it was a simple, profound truth. "The ocean is not just about power and fury," she whispered, her voice thick. "It's also about depth, and the calm that lies beneath the surface. You remind me of that." She squeezed his hand, her composure returning, but this time it wasn't a mask, it was a renewed sense of purpose. "Thank you, Ash. You've given me my heading." Her strategic mind was already working again, but with a new perspective. She wasn't trying to defeat the storm. She was looking for its rhythm. He found Marnie on the highest battlements of the castle, a place tourists were not allowed. She was sitting on the edge of the parapet, her legs dangling over the dizzying drop, sharing a small bag of chips with her Morpico. She'd changed into her usual punk gear, leather jacket, black boots, torn jeans. It was her armor. The wind was strong up here, whipping her dark hair around her face, but she seemed oblivious to it. Ash walked over and sat beside her, not on the edge, but a safe distance from it. He didn't say anything, just watched the sickly lights of the city below. "Afraid of heights?" she asked without looking at him, her tone teasing. Faced a pissed-off Rayquaza in the stratosphere, he replied with a small smile. "I'm not afraid of heights. I'm just not stupid." She let out a small, genuine laugh. They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the crunching of chips and the howling of the wind. "My brother's down there," she said finally, her voice small. "He's setting up a shelter in the Spikemuth tunnels. For our people. For anyone who needs it." She hugged her knees to her chest. "He tried to get me to stay. Said I'd done my part. Said this last bit, it was for kings and champions. He's worried about you," Ash said softly. "Course he is. He's my brother." She fell silent again, then took a shaky breath. "I keep thinkin', what if he's right? What am I doing here? I'm no chosen one. I'm just a girl from a forgotten town who got lucky. Bea's a master fighter. Nessa's a genius. You're, you. You've saved the world more times than I've had hot dinners. Me? I just yell a lot and have a moody hamster." Morpico chirped indignantly at the hamster comment, and she gave it a chip to placate it. Ash looked at her, at the genuine fear and self-doubt in her eyes. He didn't see a pillar of spirit. He just saw Marnie, a girl who was terrified of losing the people she loved. He didn't give her a speech about her importance. He didn't remind her of her title. He just told her a story. "When I first started my journey," he said, his gaze on the horizon, "all I wanted was to be the very best, like no one ever was. I thought it was about winning battles, collecting badges, conquering leagues. I was so focused on the goal, on the finish line." He paused, a nostalgic smile on his face. "But along the way, I kept running into people. Friends. And they were always getting into trouble. And their towns were in danger. And their Pokémon were hurting. And I'd stop. I'd always stop to help. And every time I did, I'd think, this is a distraction. This is taking me away from my goal. It took me a long, long time to realize, that was the goal." He turned to look at her. "It was never about being the best. It was about being there for the ones who needed you. It was about protecting the small, quiet moments. A kid sharing lunch with their Pokémon. A town having a festival. A brother looking out for his little sister." His voice was filled with a simple, powerful conviction. "That's why we're fighting, Marnie. Not for Galar, the idea. But for Spikemuth. For the right of your brother to worry about you. For the right of your people to have a safe place to hide. You're not here because you're a pillar of spirit. You're here because you, more than anyone, understand exactly what it is we stand to lose. You're not our secret weapon. You're our reason." Marnie stared at him, her dark eyes wide and shining in the twilight. No one had ever spoken to her like that. No one had ever seen past her tough exterior to the fiercely protective heart beneath and called it the most important thing in the world. She sniffled, wiping her nose on the sleeve of her jacket. "You're a right idiot, you know that," she said, her voice thick with unshed tears. "Comin' up here and sayin' stuff like that." She offered him the bag of chips. "Want one?" He took one, and they sat there together on the roof of the world, sharing a bag of cheap chips as the sky darkened, two lonely kids finding comfort in the quiet space between them. The summons came an hour later. The transport was ready. Ash met the three of them in the main hall. He looked at them, truly looked at them. B, her spirit centered and sharp as a blade. Nessa, her mind clear and calm as the deep ocean. Marnie, her heart full of a fierce, unwavering purpose. They were no longer just his allies. They were a part of him. He stepped forward and took their hands, his left hand holding Bea's and Nessa's, his right holding Marnie's. The mark on his hand pulsed, not with anxiety, but with a warm, steady, golden light. It was a light that flowed from him to them, and from them back to him, a circuit of shared strength, clarity, and purpose. "Sonia," he said into his calm, his voice ringing with a newfound, unshakable resolve. "We're ready. Tell us the plan." Sonia's voice came back, overlaid with a map that now glowed on his Rotom phone. "Valerius has reached the Dyna tree. He's begun the ritual. The energy readings are off the charts, he's creating a massive storm, a vortex of Dynamax energy, to shield himself. You'll never be able to fly through it. So we go under it," Nessa finished, already seeing the path. Sonia confirmed. "There's an old, abandoned underwater tunnel that leads from the mainland coast to the island the Dyna tree is on. It's our only way in. It will get you past the storm, to the foot of the tree." United, stronger than ever, their fears acknowledged and their bonds forged in the quiet moments of the castle, they walked out towards the transport. They were no longer just a king and his queens, bound by law. They were a single, four-hearted entity, ready to walk into the heart of the storm and face the coming night, together. The end. Thank you for watching this video. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video.